Yeah. Let's start some rumors.
Oh, I want to start rumors.
That's just what they need.
Good evening, everybody. We are going to go ahead and get started with our February 6, 2024 Board of Education meeting. Before we convene the public meeting, we do have a need for a closed executive session of the board, and I will entertain a motion to enter a closed session.
Do you want to do that? Go ahead.
I move that the board on February 6, 2024 go into closed executive session to discuss the character, professional competence, or physical or mental health of an individual.
I second.
We have a motion and a second on the table. Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll start with a roll call vote with Vice President Williams.
Bryce Williams, yes. Jenny Sika, yes.
Nate Salazar, yes.
Ryan Jensen, yes.
Misty Sweat, yes.
Excellent. That motion carries. We'll go ahead and prepare the room. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and get the meeting restarted. As you know, the board did just leave a closed executive session, and so please excuse us for being a touch late while we got the boardroom set up and technology set up for our meeting, which is going to convene today is February 6, 2024. I'd like to welcome everybody. Thank you for being here. I do want to make sure that I recognize our association presidents. I see some who are with us already today. So for our buildings and grounds, we have President Elia Ocampo, Child Nutrition, President Tanya Slaughter, for Transportation, President Chris Krogh, for SLEA, it looks like your whole committee is here. I know I see Chelsea, James, and Mike, so thank you for being here. And then for SLASA, our school administrators, they are represented by Ms. Kesley Green. I don't know if she's made it here yet, but I know she's on her way or watching remotely. I also want to, well, actually, I'll get to that in just a second. Up next, we have our Pledge of Allegiance, and we've asked Student Board Member Josiah Evans to lead us in the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Excellent. Thank you, Josiah, for leading us in the pledge. For recognitions, before I move on to the National Board Certified Teachers, I do just want to read a brief statement on Black History Month. Salt Lake City School District would like to recognize February as Black History Month. Black History Month is an annual celebration of achievements by African Americans and a time for recognizing their central role in U.S. history. Superintendent Grant, moving to National Board Certified Teachers.
Yes, we have Desi Olson here to present this to us. Desi is responsible for social studies and civic education and national board certification here, so please come on up.
So, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good evening. This is always a highlight of my year. I'd like to thank the Salt Lake City School District for supporting and recognizing teachers who pursue and renew their National Board Certification. National Board Certification is the highest teaching certificate a teacher chooses to pursue. It is a process grounded in teaching standards and evidence in which teachers analyze and reflect on the impact their teaching practice has on their students' learning. Teachers complete 4 components which address a range of practices including their content knowledge, differentiation of instruction, classroom environment, assessment literacy, and professional learning and collaboration. An NBCT must renew their certificate every 5 years through the maintenance of certificate process, which requires NBCTs to demonstrate their continued professional growth and how they continue to meet the NBPTS teaching standards. Over 65 Salt Lake City School District teachers have achieved their National Board Certification since 2006. Though many have retired, today we have 38 active NBCTs in our district, the largest number of any district in Utah. Additionally, Additionally, over 30 teachers are registered to begin their initial national board certification, for which we offer robust support that includes monthly workshops and pairing them with one of 13 NBCTs who serve as mentors to them. So it's my privilege to call out our new and renewed NBCTs for this year. Thank you for recognizing them. And so we have, so I guess what we'll do is have them come up, and then we'll all meet outside. So our new National Board Certified teachers, and I'd like to let you know that these 3 new National Board Certified teachers persevered through COVID and other real challenging situations until they achieved. And so it really is. And they are Rebecca DeFreitas. I don't think she's here tonight. She's at Northwest. Becca Hodgkinson from Escalante. And Leanne Jennings from Uinta. Our renewed NBCTs are Rebecca Hansen at West. I believe she's on, not here this evening. Elise Maxwell from Bonneville. Sarah Nichols, MTSS specialist. Michelle Okabu Hillside. I'm not sure. Emily Petty, Rose Park. And Principal Matthew Teeter.
Thank you.
They are all standing back here, but they all went to the back of the room.
I want to say Laura Cheney is here also, and she's been a huge support with the National Board.
Tiffany.
And we were around the schools on a Friday at 4 o'clock. And many of these teachers were in their classrooms still.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that presentation, and congratulations on your achievements, teachers, and for all you do for us. Moving on to our consent agenda. Before I seek a motion for that, Business Administrator Kearsley has an update regarding item C on the purchasing and accounting reports. Business Administrator Kearsley?
Yes, so there needs to be a correction on Exhibit 3B1C, the increase to the Kids Play Foundation. There's a typo in the 3rd paragraph where it says purchase order, the original purchase order B240843 was initially set up for, and in the exhibit it says 38,000. That should really be 32,000. And then everything else is correct, so we will make that correction on the exhibit retroactively.
Okay, thank you. And that'll be reflected with the minutes and the notes from this meeting. Okay. Thank you. Are there any questions from board members about that particular change that needs to happen? Okay, thank you. I'll go ahead and seek a motion for the consent agenda.
I move that we accept the consent agenda with the amendment noted by Business Administrator Kearsley.
I second.
All right, we have a motion and a second on the table. Any discussion to the motion? Brian?
I do have one question, and that is on number 7, final school land trust plans. In the exhibit, when I was clicking on it, it would not open up to the folders that we needed to access to see where our board member assignments were for reviewing the land trusts. I talked to Dr. Taylor, and he sent me a Zoom link, but I want to make sure that the rest of the board, that you all got your Zoom link, because
Yeah.
I don't think we would have been able to access it without that.
I got it today.
Yeah, I got mine as well.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you, Board Member Jensen. Any further discussion? All right, seeing none, we'll do a roll call vote, starting with Board Member Sika.
Jenny Sika, yes.
Ashley Anderson, yes.
Nate Salazar, yes.
Mohammed, yes.
Brian Jensen, yes.
Christy Sweat, yes.
Bryce Williams, yes.
Excellent, that motion passes. Thank you, board members. Next on our agenda is our request to speak. I do have a brief statement that the board would like me to read before we begin. These are just speaker guidelines for public comment to be read by the board president. The board enjoys the opportunity to hear from the public during the comment portion of its meetings. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to remind you of our board rules governing your comments. The total time reserved for public comment is not to exceed 15 minutes, with all speakers or groups limited to 3 minutes. The board will not allow public comments during board meetings that are slanderous, obscene, or otherwise violate state or federal law. Employees and/or their representatives may not use the public comment period to address issues that should be raised through existing formal communication channels or established grievance or negotiations procedures. I'd also like to explain that unless the speaker's topic is already on the agenda, state law prohibits the board from taking action on items raised during the public comment period. However, if it seems appropriate to the circumstances, I may direct district staff to follow up with a speaker on the topic discussed. Our first speaker this evening is Sarah Nichols.
Here?
That'd be great. Also a renewed board certified teacher.
Yeah, I'm triple duty and here with SLCSD too. But, okay, hi everyone. My name is Sarah Nichols. I'm a mom of 2 little kids in the district. I'm kind of here in that capacity. And in the capacity of someone who cares a lot about our students, not like generally, but like specific students that I adore and care about and want to help protect. So first, thank you. I'm proud of the stance that our district has taken when it comes to protecting our students with diverse sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. Even something as innocuous as a pride flag, which means so much to students as they scan for safety, is an act of rebellion and a reason for discipline in other districts. And now, of course, we face new and looming legislation that looks to further stigmatize and other our trans and non-binary students. I know that with the passage of HB 257, our schools will have to wade through the implications and find ways to follow the law while still doing what we do, which is protecting our kids and making sure they have access to a safe and uplifting environment in which to learn. We know that transgender youth face higher rates of suicidality and depression, which is a direct result of society's stigmatization of their mere existence. LGBTQ students who go to a gender-affirming school have lower rates of attempted suicide, and we know that transgender students' suicide risk is cut significantly if they have one accepting adult in their lives. Nationally, 80% of transgender students avoided bathrooms because they felt unsafe or uncomfortable at school, and 64% avoided PE for the same reason, and that was before this new wave of bills targeting our trans and non-binary kids. To give you an idea of the scope of this challenge, I want to make sure you know that we're not talking about 1 or 2 students per school or 1 or 2 students per grade level. We're talking about 1 or 2 students or more in each class period, in each classroom, at least at the high school level, which has been my experience. And there's a strong overlap with our trans and non-binary kids and kids who are neurodivergent. So that they may already have difficulty navigating rules and complicated structures and expectations, and this would make it significantly more difficult. I had a student last year who didn't use the bathroom until November because it was difficult and awkward to navigate what should be an easy thing. They didn't know where the gender-neutral bathrooms were. They didn't know the rules on using them and how to be allowed to do so. Didn't feel comfortable going to the office to a nice bathroom because of the attention they were afraid they would attract. And this is not uncommon. You don't have to dig deep to find stories of students getting UTIs from avoiding the bathroom or skipping school altogether because they don't feel comfortable navigating the bathroom situation. HB 257 and its restrictions on bathroom and locker room use obviously have to be followed, but great care should be taken to make sure our students are protected from its ramifications. This means making sure each school has multiple options for safe, clean, gender-neutral bathrooms and locker rooms. In our larger schools, like our high schools, this means these bathrooms need to be strategically located in multiple parts of the school so it doesn't take an exceptionally long time for a student in class to get to them so that they feel comfortable using them and they're not missing class because of this new rule. It also might mean having some neutral areas outside of the bathrooms for students to engage in normal social activities like putting on mascara and talking about crushes. To make this happen, you must prioritize these students. You must find a way to fast-track funding and approval for some retrofitting of facilities. It needs to happen now, not next year or when new high schools are built.
Thank you, Sarah. Next to speak is Amanda Longwell.
Try and be quick. Most of you already know me. Got kids currently at Highland High School and Highland Park Elementary. Have been at Ensign Elementary, Washington Elementary, Clayton Middle School, Hawthorne Elementary. A lot of that's mostly because of the special education programming is not consistent throughout the district. That's not the only reason I'm here. There's one point I wanted to make. I had a conversation, organic conversation with the security officer over at Highland High School, who, from his perspective, he shook the hand of a student being friendly and was asked to leave his position. I don't know the full story behind it. There's always different versions, but talking to different students and such, that was the one that they felt comfortable with. So where we were concerned about the implications of the metal detectors and then having the friendly security guard be ousted by a handshake is concerning. So FYI, if you're not aware, just pointing out, if your eyes aren't on it, the HR reports have consistently been showing that we have not consistently been filling our para positions. So we still have that being a significant problem that's significantly impacting our special education students. So we need solutions, we need training, we need compensation, we need full-time positions. We did get the full-time positions last round, but our school that has 3 self-contained units, a resource room, they were only allocated 1 from what I was told, and they have a lot more need than just 1. So the turnover still exists, and it's pretty lengthy. I know you're talking about special education tonight. There's a comment about maintenance of effort. Please, please, please don't be afraid of it. Please do better. I could go into what other districts are doing to better support their special education program instead of standalone. There's not enough time. I noticed that you showing that there's an increase in special education spending, even though there's a decline in the allocation of students. I'm curious if that is because of the federal spending that's been allocated toward that, or if it's standalone, separate of that extra money we receive from the federal government. Got to try to move fast. Again, the substitutes. There was some chatter in another place that had mentioned that, I don't know if we do it in our district, worth looking at, that they have 18-year-olds substituting at high school age level, where they might be substituting classmates that they went to school with. So I don't know what our protocol is, but that would be worth vetting out, because that's obviously concerning. Getting there. And then with the special education discussion and in general, and now that we have the school closure underway, it's time to get the feet in the ground in honoring the Inclusive Schools resolution and doing better, especially for our more complex kids. It's time to do quality inclusion. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Our next speaker is Kristen McDonald.
I am here because I want cell phones out of classrooms, and I've been wanting it for 16 months at East High, and I'm at a stalemate. So I know that this came up in your last meeting in the study session, and I watched that meeting, and I know that Dr. Hall referenced the SCC's resolution asking for this, and I wanted to make it clear that the reason that I wrote that resolution is because I can't get the school to get on board. And I know we talked about shared governance and how the schools are working together, but that's not what's really happening, and it's really frustrating. We have parents who want it. It was almost unanimous. We've done surveys, I've sent those to you by email, where we have 70 to 80% of both faculty and parents that are in support of this. But what we're running into is that teachers don't want to have that restriction in the classroom. And I think it's interesting because I read the governor's letter encouraging this, and I feel like his push was to get parents and students on board. And I'm here to say I really want to get teachers on board. I know that we've come to a place where it's really convenient to be able to use kids' cell phones in class, but as a parent who is aware of the mental health issues, the academic distraction issues, a lot of reasons why, let them have them at lunch and in between class periods, but we really don't need them in the classroom. And I know there was a lot of discussion of, well, how can we make the technology work better? And I think that's great. And we want to work with the teachers to be able to address some of those issues. But my biggest concern is that we've got kids that need to be able to focus in class, and we have kids that need to be able to disconnect, and kids that need to be able to have their mental health prioritized. We know that this is important, and I would say, let's make the bold move as a district to say that we are going to make a change. But it's not even that bold anymore. I mean, we're starting to get behind. We have schools across the country, across the state, and even across our district that are making this happen. So what we've asked is, I believe it's moving to the policy committee. Our problem is that there is a policy on the books, but there is one word that says that it's up to teacher discretion if they're going to implement that. So at East High, there is no plan. Every teacher is doing whatever works for them or doesn't work for them. It's not consistent. And I think Dr. Grant mentioned, I'm kind of confused that we have this policy, but it's not actually happening. And I'm here to say that it's not, and I'd love to see that it can. I don't want to be here fighting with teachers because, as I said, 70 to 80% of them want this too. But we just need a policy that actually backs it up. So thank you for your time, and I'll be back.
Kristen. Our next speaker this evening is Troy Davis.
All right, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to address you today. After the January 9th vote, I accepted the results of the closure and I embraced a positive outlook. I shifted my resistance to the troubled process into support for the transition. In a gesture of goodwill, I communicated support and gratitude to Dr. Grant and asked her to thank the BOC for their difficult work. Someone asked me recently if I was angry that my kid's school is closing, and I thought hard about that. And I'm not angry about the closure. I'm sad for sure, but I understand the need for closures, and I really feel for the families who rented or bought their house within walking distance of these schools and have younger kids with many years planned in elementary school. That's a really tough situation. But what does make me angry is it feels like the district is getting away with something sinister here. And the recent conflicts identified were just too much for me to ignore. Piled on top of the incorrect enrollment data and the population and enrollment study, the secret members of a committee, the secret score on the ranking spreadsheet, and many other issues, nearly all of which were identified along the way. Each problem simply brushed off as not a big deal. But I have to tell you, to the 1,000 kids and the families this impacts, every aspect of the closure process is a huge deal. I would not be sitting here today if the overall process was open to public view using all the correct data, decisions and conflicts were identified and out in the open. Even today, the data for Hawthorne is still incorrect. Enrollment has actually gone up since the start of the year, and kids inbound grew by 6% when the district shows a decline. So I could go on and on with that, but I'm not expecting or asking for perfection. But when big things are simply wrong or hidden from public view, hidden from the board members, hidden from the media, something needs to be done. So while the superintendent brushed off the conflict of interest and stated the committee as a whole made the recommendations, we cannot overlook the significant influence of the chair, who serves as the public face of school closures and interacted with over 700 families during this process. Leadership sets the tone, and the potential impact on the decision-making process cannot be ignored. This person was responsible for independently leading meetings that collected the core set of options the BOC reviewed, the 16 categories that were prepared. The district was aware of this conflict of interest throughout the process.
It's all right, keep going. Sorry about that.
Yeah, right, the timer still works. There we go. Okay, so where was I? The district was aware of this conflict of interest throughout this process, but never officially notified the board and never bothered to reassign the conflicted employee. This alone should be enough for reconsideration, but added to everything else makes reconsideration feel like a requirement. Your board rules plan for this type of situation. When new information is revealed after a vote is complete, a board member of the majority vote from January 9th is allowed to ask for reconsideration. After speaking with a lot of constituents of Board Member Salazar and Board President Salazar, and Board Member Sika, I'd like to call on one or both of you to immediately take the steps for reconsideration. Now that you have this new information, it's imperative to bring integrity to this broken process. This will allow you to stand up and be the voice your community elected you to be, both of you. Our entire district deserves transparency, fairness, and adherence to policies. I urge the school board to take decisive action to restore trust and uphold accountability. Thank you.
That's right. Our final speaker this evening is Kiru Kantua.
If it's all right, I'd like to share this time with another member. If not, I would prefer him to speak.
That's fine with me.
Okay. Hello. I come to this board meeting today representing the West Side. The lack of transparency during this process is unbelievable. That much was clear to me as I spoke with West Side residents. More than half the population we spoke to had no clues that the schools were closing until after a decision was made, and many of whom are worried about what's next. For example, Joy Rios worries about transportation, as do many others. It has also come to our attention that Brian Conley has had a biased approach as his wife is principal of Whittier and has children in other schools which were not on the chopping block. Brian also suffered an injury which did not allow him to speak properly, and the Spanish translation was off. More than 70% of the respondents were worried about the two West Side schools that were being unjustly shut down. There are people in this group who live in the middle of Jenny's district, so I will direct this next question to Jenny. Jenny, the people in your district do not want this. We have spoken to them. We are them. You stated that you were thinking of not just about the children that live in your district, but of all the students of the Salt Lake City School District. We are here to tell you that with this decision, you no longer represent us. We are here demanding you, Nate Salazar, and Jenny Sika, don't sell us out. Make a motion for reconsideration and demand the process be restarted with more transparency. Whatever happens, we know that the community wants to keep the school. At the least, we don't want new housing. Think of the children, think of the future. No nos vendan.
Thank you for your comments.
Just to finish off the time, we just want to share some of the things that we found in surveys that we went into the community. It was a couple dozen, it was almost 100. And just to say, going off of what he said about the housing, we understand that there are internal conversations already happening of what to do with these spaces. We understand. We also understand there's already internal politics that have a part in all of this. We understand that. We know that. This has been an ongoing process for decades. But we are here to say that the community does understand the implications of removing community spaces. They do understand that putting in quote-unquote affordable housing is not affordable housing. We understand that this is the process, and I appreciate if Nate Salazar and Jenny Sika really take into consideration the whole picture of what is going on with this city, and ask you, as constituents, to put a stop to this and at least restart the process, make this transparent, make this fair for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to all of our speakers this evening. We really appreciate your engagement and coming out to give us your thoughts and opinions about whatever you presented on, whether it's cell phone policies, if it's school closures, special education. Thank you for being here this evening. Moving on to our next agenda item, our reports section, school budget allocations. Business Administrator Kearsley.
So each of you were emailed, plus it's a packet on your desk there. So each year at this time, we present to the board the school budget allocations for next year, for the 24-25 school year. So I just want to cover a couple things with our school allocation spreadsheets. So sheet number 1 is current year allocation. So that's what we've allocated to the schools based on various different funding sources for the current school year. Sheet number 2 is our proposed next year's allocation. I just want to note on next year's allocation, one change that we're making, it's really the only change. So in the past, schools were allocated funds to buy office computers. What we've opted to do starting next year is we're going to centralize that process. So we've brought in the office computer allocation. IT will manage the office computers much the same way that they manage the rotation for the student computers. So that's one change you'll see from one year to the next, is pulling that allocation in, and then IT department will manage those office computers. Sheet number 3 is the carryover. So schools are allowed to carry over their discretionary money. So this sheet reflects funds that were carried over from the 2022-23 school year over to the current school year by school. And the grand total is there at the end. And then the final allocation, the final sheet is the Title I allocations. And those are put together by Christine Marriott, our Title I director. As you can see, our Title I funding continues to decrease. We did have some bumps, some artificial bumps during COVID on those funding sources, and really we're kind of returning back to pre-COVID levels on our Title I funding. A couple other things I just, as I look at these, so our school allocation method has no built-in inflationary adjustment. So I've been pondering, how do we adjust for inflation for the schools so they can continue to address the needs that they have? For the current year, one thing that we've done, so the schools get an allocation for textbooks, and then every so often we do a district-wide textbook adoption, and the schools have to pick up half that cost and the district picks up the other half. For both this year and next year, the district will pick up, well, actually this year, and I want it to be an ongoing thing, pick up the full cost of those textbook adoptions, which frees up those monies at the school to be used for other school needs. But also, as we continue this process, I want to look at, I want to weigh carryover, and then I want to weigh also inflationary adjustments. So we'll be looking at possible ways to do a formula. If the WPU now gets an automatic inflationary adjustment through the legislature, do we use that as maybe a factor of adjusting up the school allocations? But if they have significant carryovers, then maybe that limits the amount of new money they would get through an inflationary adjustment. And that's not built into either this year or next year's allocations, but those are just thoughts that I'm having as we look forward to different ways to support our schools. Other than that, this method is the same method that we've used for years. So, see if I have any other notes on here. Nope. Open to any questions on these allocations. So once the board sees them, we'll release them to the schools tomorrow so they can be planning their budgets for next year.
Board Member Sweat.
So just for clarification, Alan, on the last page, well, on any of these pages, the schools that have been identified to close, why did you include those?
So they're included on the first page because they're open.
Right, because they're open.
The second page, they're on there because the last column is a comparative last year versus this year.
Great.
So just to keep the continuity there.
Okay.
But just know that all the schools that are slated for closure, their funds have been reallocated to wherever their students are anticipated to go.
Right.
And again, all this gets then adjusted with our October 1 counts.
I think that it's important, for us to understand that, because like even if you look at the last 2 pages, when you're talking about the proposed Title I comparison, it goes to what you just said. that the children that are at Riley, that money still follows them, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, most of these formulas are student count driven, so wherever the student goes,
Wherever the student
those
goes.
allocations follow.
Exactly. So could we talk about the rollovers for a second? So that's on page 2, is that right?
Page
3?
3.
Okay, page 3. So there's a couple of schools that have significant rollovers. Northwest is one of them, almost $1 million. Can you talk a little bit about what your process is when you look at, is that unusual to see a large amount of money rolling over that way? And is there also a process of how you look at how are those funds identified to be spent out?
Right. So the Esser funds through COVID have kind of thrown a whole wrench into this because potentially schools have used their Esser funds and then carried over their discretionary funds. With Esser funds going away, it is anticipated that we should be seeing these carryovers go down because they won't have those Esser funds available. They may want to keep doing things. We don't have any automatic, if your carryover is X percentage, then you don't get any more. But those are some things that we want to be thinking of. You know, if you keep growing your carryover year after year at a school, I mean, first off, we would obviously talk to the principal and say, you know, what needs do you have, and kind of help them spend those funds on true needs to help the students. But otherwise, if they can't identify anything, then it's like, okay, maybe we're allocating too much to your school, and we would pull that back and reallocate it towards other needs. We haven't done that yet, but we're thinking about it.
Thinking about it. That is really helpful to hear you say that. I think the Esser fund part is important. You know, as we look at these carryovers, the schools have until the end of 2024, is that right, to spend out those funds?
The end of this school year, yep.
So the end of the school year, would that be 2025?
No,
Or are you
so-
talking this end of this school year?
End of this school year.
2024.
So the funds expire September 30th of 2024.
Right.
So we took some of those funds and allocated it straight to the schools for them to spend on as discretionary at their schools. So that they really don't have anything between July 1 and September 30th. So we really want them to be done spending their ESSER funds at the end of this school year.
So Superintendent, maybe in October, it might be good to have this come back, you know, just so that we can see, you know, that the funds are being expended. And then if Alan is actually thinking about his idea, that might be a time for us to, you know, look at that and talk about it.
Look at carryover.
To look at carryover. Thank you, Alan.
Board Member Anderson?
Yes, I've had an email from a parent group with concerns over their expected staffing for the next year. So as I'm looking at this, I'm thinking about their questions and wondering if you can use this a little time during the meeting to explain how these numbers would equate to the number of staff that a parent would expect to see in their school. But as a follow-up to that, what decision-making, once they have these numbers, the principal and the School Improvement Council, or SIC, have versus the role that, say, a PTA or a school community council would have.
Right. So the staffing allocations are based on estimated enrollment for next year, and then there's the board-approved ratios for the different school levels. So you take total and it says divide it by the ratios, and here's how much staff that allocates to. And that's paid for with a separate pot of money. Now, this money comes to the school as really discretionary money. So the schools, obviously the land trust money with in conjunction with the SCC, but all the other money, if the SIC and the principal, you know, as they look at what are our needs, they can address those needs. If their needs are, we want to reduce class sizes in grade 3 by even more than what the allocation is, they can look at their allocated resources, and if they chose to, they could hire an additional third grade teacher for that school.
So what, in summary, you're saying is that if a parent had a question about the number of staff and they were looking at this, the first line of who they would want to talk to about that would be the school principal.
The school principal, correct.
And then the SCC would be a secondary good way to do that. My only other question is, in terms of that projected enrollment, like you said, we won't know until October 1st what the actual enrollment is of a school building. So how were these numbers determined when we had program movement? Specifically, like DLI obviously is new programs. So unlike a student in magnet class where you can predict where they're going to move, how did we make predictions about how many students would enroll in programs?
Yeah, I can be general if you want to get specific. Sam back there can get specific, but really it's taking historical enrollment in those programs and just kind of assuming that that full program, if it moved, is going to move to where it was. Now, when we make the changes like we're going to see next year, it kind of makes your historical data a little not as effective for making projections, so we're doing our best. And then we'll, as we get new solid data, as we have actual enrollments, we'll continue to improve those projections.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Board Member Bede.
I always wondered why we have allocated the school lunch fund kind of distributed equally, knowing that some schools have a lot more students we didn't need of school lunch day. I would love to hear from you, and I'm hoping, the board will think about this down the road. I mean, how amazing would it be if we were to have a free lunch across our schools district? I mean, the thought I was there. No, seriously. I mean, we live in an amazing, rich country, and there is no reason for us not to have free lunch for them. Growing up in Morocco, we had free lunch, but I promise you there were so many bugs in that food, but we had to eat it, but we could not pay for it. But here, we really owe it to these kids, and I'm sure we could do something about that. Right. Please.
Let me just address what that column is. So there's a column called Board Distributed Student Achievement Funds, and in parentheses, school lunch, and it's $3,000 per applicable school. So the lunch tickets or payments are made at the central office. So this is an addition. This is not. This is additional property tax allocation to the schools for the administrative burden of collecting the lunch payments at the office. As opposed to maybe in the past there or in other districts, it's collected at the point of sale. This pulls the cash out of that process and moves it over to the central office. So it's to help, if they needed additional help in the office to manage this helps cover those costs. So it says school lunch, and it's really just an administrative issue with school lunch and not the actual school lunch program itself.
Okay. So,
and if you notice, there are some in the current year, second page, that aren't allocated.
Yeah.
Those are the schools that are the community feeding programs where everybody eats free. So since there is no ticket needed, there's no allocation there.
Okay. Yeah, so Dr. Grant would love to say something about that. Thank you.
Good to know. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Bede. Any other comments or questions? Alan, anything you'd like to close with?
Nope. So as I said in the cover memo, so this is, as we go through the budget process, this is kind of the first document or presentation we're going to do as we show you the building blocks of the budget. When you look at the budget book, you're not going to see this kind of detail school by school. You kind of see it all summed up. But just to let you know, these are the kind of the building blocks that we use to build the budget that you will eventually approve in June.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alan.
Moving on to our next agenda item under the reports section, elementary and secondary school emergency relief, also known as Esser update. I think we're sticking with you.
All right, so this is just our, I'd call it a quarterly update, but we haven't exactly hit each quarter. But it's just an update to the board of where we stand on our current Esser programs. The only Esser funds we have left are the Esser 3 or the American Rescue Plan, ARP, sometimes it's called Esser. So if you start on the second page, it's just, if you remember, when we initially received these funds, we had to submit a plan to the state saying, here's kind of what we are going to do with the funds. And that's where you'll see plan areas. So we had specific plan areas in that plan. And also the third column is that this was the budget that was submitted to the state. And then we kind of show some actual expenditures. So we started spending this money in fiscal year 22, which is the 2021-22 school year. So the amount of money we spent there, then we have 23 actual spent. We have 24, it says spent and encumbered because we have POs or contract salaries that aren't spent yet, but they're in essence used. And then we just have one total on the following page at the bottom for there's $7.96 million that is not yet claimed. I just want to assure you that the district will spend that money. We will not give it back. So just an interesting note on this federal money, there's no supplanting requirement. What supplanting means, like Title I has a supplanting, we have to use Title I to make things even better. The Esser funds don't have those requirements. So at the end of the day, if we had to, we can find some qualifying expenditures, move them over, and use up those Esser funds. There is some talk at the state office requesting a one-year extension from the federal government. Because I don't know the timing on that. We are moving forward as if September 30th, 2024 is the deadline, and we will do what we need to do to spend down those funds. If you go to the next page, we have a couple other smaller grants that are ESSER related. We have our homeless program where we've hired 2 additional people to help Mike serve the homeless population. We will have $55,000 left at the, that's not encumbered yet, but again, if we need to move some of Mike's salary over there to spend that down, we absolutely will.
So was a bonus.
No. We have some after-school funds, which help support and strengthen our after-school program, and then our summer learning. Our summer learning is almost done because, we did our bulk of our summer learning the last several years, but we do have some money that will be left over, and if we need to, because we always have summer school in June, we can address needs with the $28,000. The last one is the one I just want to put on your radar as we build our budgets. So this shows the number of FTE, FTE meaning full-time equivalents of employees that currently are paid with our ESSER funds. So what I want to emphasize is the funding are going away, and these are the people that are paid out of those fundings. I've highlighted some green, the 3 top green ones, because of those are people that were hired for our one-to-one initiative that we've paid out of ESSER. The board's already approved further one-to-one, so those have to continue because that's, we're a one-to-one district. The rest of those, as we continue to build the budget, we're going to address the effect of those, the need of those, and if there are things we want to continue or find additional resources for, we would bring that stuff back to the board. You're going to see a lot of paraprofessionals in here, and this goes back to the carryover question. A lot of what we saw when we allocated ESSER funds to the schools is they took their parapros that they were paying for out of their discretionary, moved it over to ESSER. So now, in theory, they'll take those and move them back. I would imagine a lot of the schools have increased those numbers since the beginning of the pandemic, but they'll move them back to their discretionary, and they do have those carryovers that can, if they want to ramp down, they can use those carryovers to ramp down some of those needs. Or, as we look at, additional needs at the schools. So this has been on my radar for the last 3 years, knowing that it's the big fiscal cliff. But just know we're working, we're planning, and we're continually addressing that issue.
Thank you, Alan. Any questions? Board Member Jensen.
So when we're over here looking at letters training, that was a program that we agreed to for literacy with our elementary school children. I see the money spent in 2022, 2023. Nothing was spent in 2024. That's because the training is now completed.
Yeah, so that was the push to get all of the applicable teachers trained. So letters training still exists, but it's on a more limited basis on new teachers that might come in.
New teachers. So my question is, are we going to ensure that those new teachers get the letters training?
Yes, there's been letters training this year, It's just, that's paid for with a different source of money, an ongoing source. So we used Esser money to do the big push, and now we're
Okay.
using other funds to do the continuing work on that.
Comes back to the supplanting, I guess. Huh? Okay, so when we're talking about that supplanting, so there's basically very close to $8 million left in that pot. When you're talking about the FTE count, with your supplanting, can you be, I mean, if you didn't have needs for that, can you be working that to use to help with that?
Well, the FTE is already paid for Esser, so if I needed to use up that money, I would take other FTE that's not in Esser but still qualifies
Okay,
and
that's
move
what I
it
meant.
in. Yep.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
So you can do that kind of moving around.
Right, so that's kind of stuff we can do at the end of the year when we really see where we land, and if we need to move stuff over, we can.
Okay.
Qualifying expenditures.
Well, I'm just trying to figure out how to address some of those.
And largely, anything in the classroom, anything addressing student achievement is a qualifying expenditure.
Okay.
Board Member Anderson?
I think some of the questions I have will move to the next report that we have on special education funding, but the thing that sticks out to me as I look at this is how many special education roles could be impacted as Esser expires, specifically in the behavior space. And this is not really a question for you, Alan, per se, about what we would continue, but it's about thinking as a board that as we've had these reports on social and emotional learning, or as we call it, SEL, we continue to circle around sometimes that we're not really talking about explicit instruction from a vendor. We're really talking about building capacity of student services, and that's what I see represented here. So I think as we look at how to close these gaps, what I think we might also consider looking at is the way that all of these things are housed across departments, but they're all really trying to serve our same goal. And as we navigate SEL as a priority, sometimes we have that low-hanging fruit of like, what vendor tool are we going to pick, rather than looking at like, how are the counselors implementing those tools in a different space than the 4 FTE we're paying for behavior intervention and all of those things as it goes along. Like, I'd really like to see how we can direct that conversation to make sure we're maximizing the services that kids are getting for social and emotional skill development, which I think is maybe distinct from what we've been talking about with SEL. And I just want to highlight again how many of those positions are impacted in this way. So I don't know if you have thoughts about that, but like I said, it could transition in many
Right.
ways to the next item.
Because I know both literacy and SEL being the board goals and have been for several years. We had a discussion a couple years ago because those goals have always been paid for out of fund balance or one-time allocations. And when the last approved allocation came to an end, we said, well, these are great Esser qualifying expenditures. Let's move it into there. And then as Esser comes to a close, we can further talk about that. So we will continue to have those discussions as we continue to build the budget.
Any other questions or comments? B.A. Kearsley, I'm assuming we're going to have a lot more conversations about Esser and what that looks like in our plans moving forward relative to specifically these FTEs and other programs.
Yep.
Oh, can I ask one more question?
Please.
I want to go back to what you said. We're proceeding as though the state doesn't get an extension. What would the future look like if the state were to get an extension? Would it revise anything we would do? Or we're proceeding, it's going to be done, and we're moving forward?
Well, it all depends on when we hear any word from the state that an extension's been accepted. If we at the end of the year have that almost $8 million sitting in there and we got an extension, we would just figure out a way to maybe continue some of these programs for the remaining the next year, or however much $8 million would buy us. Otherwise, we would take some other qualifying expenditures and move them over. So that kind of gives us that flexibility, since we won't know when we hear. We can easily pivot either way if we needed to.
And to be specific, you're talking about not the state making the decision, but it's the federal government that has to make the decision.
The state, I don't even know if the state submitted an application for extension yet, but they are talking about it. And then once they do that, I don't know how long it takes the federal government to approve that request.
And I think that right now what they're looking at is a sweeping extension, because there's multiple districts across the United States that are asking for extension. And so if they make any kind of movement, it would have to be at the federal level.
Like some of the issues we have, we're doing a lot with HVAC systems, but we have some of the projects we've already been told the equipment's not going to get here in time to be installed by the deadline. So we're looking at, all right, do we cancel those projects? Do we cross our fingers and see? So we're looking at all those opportunities and challenges.
Thanks, Alan. Appreciate the time.
Thank you.
Our next item under reports is special education funding and facilities update. Superintendent Grant.
Yep, Erin Anderson, our Director of Special Education, will come and has a presentation for us as well on this. Thanks,
Not
Erin.
promising I can use it well, but. Thank you. Okay. We'll just go. Okay. Thank you for having me today, Board. I want to take just a quick moment before getting into the slides to thank Alan and Christina for helping me pull some of this data and put it together, as well as the reason we added facilities in there. We've been working really hard with Todd Plaga and Isaac, he's usually here, there he is, for creating some new spaces within our district to be versatile for some of our programs. So it's been amazing to work with them to make this happen. So we're going to share that along the way. This is the perfect night to talk about this because my funding, as you've already talked about, ties in a lot with some of the Esser pieces and some of the other things you're talking about. But from a general standpoint, prior to Esser and prior to COVID, we have the two basic funds that we get funded through. So we get funded at a federal level, which for those of you who've been in education long enough, President Obama did a lot to increase that funding because that funding was actually never done according to how IDA was originally written. So we're still not seeing as much funding as was originally intended in that national law, but we're seeing some and we appreciate that. We also have some state funding, and then one of the things that we're working through in Utah specifically is updating all of our Medicaid laws. And so this is something you might hear as a hot topic from some of our special ed teachers. We have Medicaid logs and time studies that are required in order to get that funding back. So essentially we provide the services, we submit for the services, and then we get the funding back. And so that's another way that we get funding. And then last but not least, and this was referenced in public comment, is the maintenance of efforts. That can be done at a district level of funding. And Alan can address any of those questions, and we'll probably get into that a little bit more as we move forward. But the idea is that we can ask for funding, and once that funding is approved, we continue to get that funding through that funding source. Where the federal government and state government may vary up and down.
Yes, so I'll take the financial slide. What this slide is a pie chart of the 2023 actual expenditures in the special ed program. And even though it's pretty small, as you can see, 95% of the expenditures are in salary and benefits. District-wide, that's closer to like 86%, which is still high, but you can see in special ed, largely we're using those funds to pay for people. And then we have some contracted service, and then just other very small pieces of that pie. This chart shows just a 10-year history of special education expenditures. You can see there's just following a trend. Started in 13-14, it was just under 20 million, whereas now we're just under 25 million for last year. And here's the number of eligible students over last year. You can see this chart largely follows the same kind of slope that district-wide we would follow. And you see that dip when the pandemic hit, which if I put a similar chart for the district-wide, you'd probably see a very similar similar line. And this shows expenditures per student for the general fund, which is the bottom blue line, and then special education, which is the top orange line. And as you can see, largely they follow the same trend. Clearly, we're paying more per student in special ed, which that's why we get those additional funds. But as time has gone by, you're seeing a very similar increase in both those trends. So there's not one that's way out of whack versus another. They're just following the same issues.
Thank you. So we're going to address, or I'm going to kind of outline some of the things that go into the costs of the programming. Alan's already indicated the majority are people, which is an awesome thing, and we'll see that as well. But that 3% will come into play here as we talk a little bit about, we've added programming over the last 10 years to better support all of our students district-wide. So with this additional programming over the last 10 years or so, we have added a post-secondary program that pulls out, I shouldn't say pull out. So what happens in special education is a student can qualify at 3 years old for pre-K, but they can go all the way until they're 22 post-high. So when our students have completed 4 years of high school and they either get a certificate of completion or an alternate diploma, they may still be eligible for IEP services. And we provide those services outside of the high school to provide transitionary opportunities for them. We call the two programs we currently have VIP. VIP stands for Vocational Independence Program. And then we have SCORE, which is what we're going to celebrate later on with their brand new gorgeous facility. You're all welcome to join us on the 12th. To see our new space at about 8:45 if you want to come out. SCORE stands for Self-Advocacy, Community, Occupation, Recreation, and Education. Again, these are for our students who've completed their 4 years at their high school, and we're providing them with access to jobs and to vocational opportunities. And we have created both of those programs in central locations so we can access mass transit and things like that. So that's taken some additional staffing and some additional funding and location places to be at. In addition, we have added a partnership with the University of Utah to support some therapy needs within our district so that we have a therapy unit in elementary, middle school, and high school, and that's the last bullet. We just created in the last couple of years the Arise therapy unit at West High to make sure that continuum was accessible for all our students that we felt needed that level of support. In addition to those new add-ons to what we were already offering, we just have an increase in student intensity. All we're talking about is budgets. As you've looked at some of the financial pieces that Alan's shown you, we have an MOU with the U for those therapy units that are about $250,000 a year. We have increase in needs for contracted services for nurses. We have had increase of need for nursing supports. Anytime a student requires additional nursing needs that we can't provide with our nurses, we contract that out. We contract out, they're called interveners. They're sign language interpreters for students who are deaf of hard of hearing. That's contracted out for students, and they work one-on-one, signing to a student all day as that's required. So all of those contracted services we provide as needed when students enter Salt Lake. And so that's something that we've seen increase in costs. As you've seen, the cost of everything has increased over the years. We've also increased the pay for our paraeducators. Thank you. This has been something that has been asked for to not only attract good candidates, but also keep good candidates. So this has been something really important to our department. We've increased pay along with HRS and Allen for substitutes. So again, we can potentially find substitutes for our classrooms. And then something that I've worked with Allen and HRS on is when we hire school psychologists, when we hire audiologists, they are required to have a higher level of education just to walk through the door. And so we are now honoring that educational level by paying that doctorate pay at lane one, so that they can then want to come to Salt Lake. So some of that recruitment piece was something that we were missing in the past that we've addressed with some of our increased costs. And then just again, inflation has happened, and we've just had an increase in general of costs of living. I'm going to just pause. We're good with that. We're going to kind of segue into people. So that was some of the additional pressures that I saw in that 3%, but now we're going to talk about people really quick. So we staff 460 adults in the special education department. 421 of those work directly with students every day. So you're going to see that broken out as we move forward. I think that's huge. We are not super top heavy in our district, and that is critical to providing the supports that our students need. The very first people we'll talk about are our licensed teachers. We have 156 licensed teachers district-wide. They work in anything from a resource class or pre-K, it starts as low as pre-K, resource, all the way through our post-high program. We also have one teacher of the visually impaired and one teacher who teaches orientation and mobility. In addition to our special ed teachers, which we have in every building, we have speech and language pathologists. There's 27 of those district-wide. They are all assigned to a school. So every school, every student who requires speech has access to it in their school. They don't have to go to another location to get those services. Something I've noted in working with our speech and language department, they have had a slight increase in number of students who have required speech services since COVID. So they've actually seen an increase about 200 kiddos that are either still qualifying or are qualifying for speech. And that's a unique little disruption in our force that we weren't necessarily planning on. But so we have those individuals in the classroom. For our paraeducators, we currently staff 238 paraeducators district-wide. Again, this starts all the way in preschool and ends in our post-high program. They're seen in a variety of locations. We have some distinctions, and the distinctions also have to do with the need of a classroom and pay. And so we have added those 24 full-time paraeducator positions, which Board Member Anderson indicated a lot of that came from Esser. So there is some funds that we have been using, hopefully wisely, to support needs. We've added those because we saw the need to fill classrooms with people, and we weren't always getting the applicants that we were hoping to get. They were just not happening. As I looked at the listing late last week, we had about 10 postings. 2 were already en route through HRS to be filled, and everyone, I think, except one, had applicants in the queue. So really, I'm quite pleased with the response that we have been getting as we posted jobs in need, and we've been working with HRS to find unique ways to advertise those things and see that those needs have been filled as best as we can. So that ends our list of people who directly, every day, are with a kiddo. The rest of my department, actually that's not an accurate statement. In this list, I have 3 occupational therapists who are in classrooms every day with students. We have 2 adaptive PE teachers, again, who are in classrooms every day with students. And then our physical therapist, who is also with students daily. And then we have our audiologist, who sees students very frequently, also has her own caseload for students who are deaf or hard of hearing, but then helps us with screenings as needed. That is unique to Salt Lake, not in Utah, but as we've interviewed for audiologists to fill the position, not every district has that, and we find that as a huge benefit for us to really support our families when they have immediate need for hearing concerns. We can help support that. We also have those 11 school psychologists. We are a testing model district. They do not typically give direct services to students, so they work a lot with our student SSCs, school student committees.
Student services.
Thank you. That one. Too many acronyms today. But yeah, SSCs, to identify that child find piece so that we are supporting students. They do the evaluation for initial assessments and reevaluations. So that's their primary purpose and support in our district. And then in addition, we also have a school nurse that helps with those. She's our contact for our contracted nurses. She works and helps me set all that up. And then if we have any additional needs, she helps me with ESY and making sure we have nurses there and things like that. And then our last level of staff that I really quickly want to touch on is we have just a few staff that are at the district level. There's 2 administrators, myself, and the coordinator. We have the 11 consultants, and then I do have 2 administrative assistants that work in the office to support whatever needs come our way. One is intended to be help more so for our related service providers. That's our speech language staff, and then the other one helps me with the SPED side of things. So that brings us to the question of what needs do we have? We want to continue with where we're at. We're not necessarily asking to add significant amounts of staffing in any one place, but rather to sustain what we're doing. And as you've looked at your budgets, you can probably see why this ask is coming to you as Esser is ending. We have some ideas for some enhancing of potentially some higher intensity behaviors throughout the district that we would like to have some very small asks that we are willing to present that can support against throughout the school district. And then the last piece is, and this also ties nicely into the core project, things happen, things break, we need new lifts, we need new badge systems. A student moves in and it's not accessible in whatever their space is. And so really expenditures happen, and as they happen, we have to answer that need and that call. So we have some ongoing maintenance things that just happen as part of, being a part of a school system. Did I miss anything in that part? I want to quickly talk about our very new facility, because this might give you some ideas of what expenditures look like within the special ed realm. It's not always, it's typical in a classroom, but then there's some additional pieces that we're really excited about. This new space, it's going to be located at Horizonte. It has 2 fully ADA compliant restrooms that has showers and lifts. We'll see them in just a minute. Very exciting. It has a locked kitchen station that allows for the adults to roll down a screen so that if there is any need to put that piece away for safety, they can, lock that apart. We have this awesome, beautiful atrium space that they're going to do some agriculture in. And then it has 2 teaching stations. And the reason we chose Horizonte was all the access to the things around it, as well as the mass transit, because these students are in that post-secondary programming. So as you look at this, if you're familiar with Horizonte, it's on the main floor, on the back end of that main hallway. It was a kitchen. It was the, what's it called? The kitchen. No, I know, but it had a...
Public kitchen.
Yes, ProStart. It was the ProStart space, if you're familiar. It's been completely redone to have that beautiful atrium in the back end, and then the 1 teaching station is going to happen in that right photo. And then in this other photo, the one on the very left is the 2nd teaching station. We've got the life skills pieces with the kitchen and the washer and dryer, all very life relevant skills. And then, like I indicated, just these 2 beautiful bathrooms. They were still doing some finishing touches, so we didn't get awesome pictures, but they're gorgeous, and we're so excited about the opportunity that we have here with this program. Okay, so that brings us to next steps.
This is where I jump in. So one thing we hope to accomplish by this presentation, so special education has been under a lot of financial pressures, even pre-pandemic. The revenue from the state and the federal government just is not keeping up with the needs. And over the last couple of years, we've increased parapro salaries. These are things that had to happen in order to provide the services. We've covered those expenditures with Esser funds. So as, again, we are designing the budget going forward, we're going to have to find unique ways to both probably combine some ongoing resources and one-time resources to be able to keep funding special ed to meet their needs. So as we continue to develop the budget going forward, you'll hear us talking about things we might be doing, resources we might be using to address some specific special education needs.
Thanks, Alan.
And I just to explain, we talked about maintenance of effort briefly. What that means is once you provide it, you have to continue to provide it. But there are some very unique ways you can provide additional resources to the special education program while still, hopefully maintaining some flexibility in your MOE requirements. And we'll continue to look at that. I've reached out to other districts because this is not an issue unique to Salt Lake District. Special education funding is I know statewide, but I suspect it's a nationwide issue. So we continue to talk with our other districts to kind of say, what are you guys doing? How are you addressing your shortfalls with local funding while still maintaining some flexibility in your MOE requirements?
So, any questions? Board Member Jensen.
Okay, so back to the financial questions. In your first slide, well, not the first slide, expenditures over the last 10 years, it shows, anyway, it looks like to me when you're looking at that 2021, 22, it was a more significant. You go back. That's when there was a more significant increase in your expenditures. The line is going up a little bit more steeply. Is that because of Esser funds?
I would say it's because of Esser funds, but if we didn't have Esser funds, the needs were still there. We just happened to be able to have Esser funds to address those needs.
Okay.
And now the needs are still there and the Esser funds are going away, so those are the challenges we're faced with,
that's
still
what I'm
meeting those
getting at.
needs without the Esser funds.
Right. So we were able to spend because we had some money, but the needs are still there.
Right.
Is that?
Yep.
Okay. Then in I believe it was the slide after that. Yeah, this is where you said that it would be reflected with general students. There was a pretty significant decline in special needs students. Is that because they were withdrawn and their parents took them somewhere else, or?
Correct. I would say, I don't know that they necessarily went anywhere else, but just withdrawn.
Okay.
Because our, and we don't have this in here, but our percent of students qualifying stays quite stable district-wide year to year. We have those numbers, and they're public right now on the district website. So our identification rate is pretty stable. Like I said, we've seen an uptick in our students with speech and language needs, whether they're continuing on, because typically they graduate out about fifth, sixth grade, and we're seeing an uptick of students move into junior high and high school still with services. But as far as identifying, if we go back to this one, and I'm wondering, my hypothesis would be that a bunch of students moved back in and we had to provide additional services or find additional staff for the students that we had with IEPs. So it's not that we were doing more, but more kids came back or more kids immediately enrolled, and we were addressing those needs.
Okay, that's how you'd explain that.
That would be my guess without digging deeper, but Alan and I can absolutely dig into those individual years. Sam also helps with pulling that data piece, because we report. So we report December 1 every year to the federal government how many students have qualified with an IEP, how many minutes they have, and where those minutes are, and that's where all of the numbers come from.
Now, I'm thinking back to, when I was in the school, it was a fairly stable thing, like you're saying, but I guess what my question is, so we see that decline, you think that some came back, probably, and that accounts for some of the expenditure. Do you anticipate that more will be coming back, or do you know what I'm saying?
Yes, I don't think at this point, what I am seeing systemically, and I think any teacher would agree to this, is we're seeing an increase of need as our generations come into kindergarten. So we're seeing more need than we typically have pre-COVID. So as a teacher and administrator pre-COVID, we were pretty stable of like, we can expect a couple referrals, but minimal in kindergarten, and we are getting students coming in not only in kindergarten, but first, second, and third who maybe have never accessed before because of COVID, that we're seeing that we're addressing those needs and potentially identifying students.
Okay. One last question. So I'm trying to remember where that slide was. Oh, yes, it's expenditures per student, so it shows the general fund. Oh, that's the one. So I just want to make sure I'm understanding it right. Let's go to 2022-23. And it looks to me like the general fund, it's about a little bit over $6,000 for a student. Is that right? That's coming from the general fund?
No, that is.
So the general fund's a little over 8,000 per student
But-
in 22-23. And then the special ed is just under 10,000 per
I
student.
think the question is that every student or which students are getting which funds?
So the blue line is the general fund expenditures in instruction divided by total students.
Okay.
So
all
the
right,
special ed students are included in that count.
Okay.
And then on top of that, there's the additional expenditures for special ed students.
Needed to make sure I understood that.
Because, and no, that's a great question, because all of our students are those gen ed students first,
Right.
and then we receive the
Yeah,
additional
and then you
funding.
get the additional special ed funding.
Exactly.
So I guess to sum that up, with a special ed student, they'd be getting like $18,000 or something like that.
Average.
Okay.
And that includes, a lot of the supports that, you have to have electricity and,
Right.
stuff like that, which in the very specific education or special education expenditures, those are not charged there, but they are included in a per pupil expenditure calculation for the total general fund.
Thanks.
Member Anderson?
Yeah. I was excited to hear about the changes at West in the presentation because I know there's been kind of a historical mismatch between the K-8 levels of support and then what happened in secondary. And compared with the relative autonomy of high school, I know that many students weren't ready for that experience, and it was apparent in the state dropout data, and I'm really appreciative of your staff for addressing that. I am curious if we'll see at the end of this year those dropout rates make a change, but my big question is how you plan to address that ongoing turnover in Ascent and Atlas, which is notable among paras, but also the classroom teachers, specifically at the middle school. And I wonder why, I know we have a tremendous level of support from administrators in the building, when turnover remains really high despite that and university partnerships, what are things from your vantage point that we could do to address that attrition?
Great question, thank you. We were just talking about this today with HRS and with the area director leadership and Dr. Taylor. So we're looking to identify a larger pool of candidates to potentially pull from, looking at some job fairs and just even some trainings that we can provide to candidates that we do have within the district, because we do understand and we do realize that there is that need within those spaces. The other thing that we have talked about and that we're working on in that partnership with the U right now, Ascend, they have weekly meetings with the U staff and kind of decompressing. So working on making sure that's happening at all those systemic levels to support the staff as well. We will continue on, and I still have to do another presentation, so I can bring that back and talk about that again if you would like.
That would be awesome. And I don't know if we've talked about raising the rate for paras previously in the conversation. I know that obviously like benefits would be like the next thing for those positions, but especially classroom teachers where those are things that are provided and we see the attrition. I just think there's more to unpack about what we could do to stop it on all levels, but obviously like benefits would be an important part of the conversation.
Board Member Big?
Thank you so much for everything you're doing out there. It's not an easy job, especially being a voice for those who, cannot stand up for themselves. and their parents are also very, very busy, making sure that they balance the scale of life and taking care of those kids. And so, and I just have some questions and a suggestion. So how many students with special needs we have in our district total?
Just over 2,500.
Okay. 2,500. Okay. And 2,500?
2,489.
I like that. Thank you for the specifications there. So I heard for the new facility, I do see it's nice to see new bathrooms. And so are they gender neutral to just make sure that?
Oh, yes. No, they
Okay.
are.
Okay.
They're absolutely gender neutral and completely ADA for those
Okay,
students.
fantastic. And so I'm a firm believer in people who are in the fields are the ones who are, who can actually tell us more of what's happening. And my suggestion, I would love next year's presentation if we could have some teachers be over here and share their real, their real life experiences. Because, for us here, we look at the information, we see it from above. But there is nothing better than actually really listening to those teachers, because I firmly believe in the personal story and its effect on motivating us to continue to do even better as we move along. I have a sister-in-law who is with special needs. I wish us as adults are just like them. We see it just straightforward. They'll tell you exactly what they think. And I wish we could have one of those kids and come here and just tell us exactly what they see, what they wish they would see out there, Do they feel comfortable? Do they feel welcome? Is there something they would wish to see? Things like that, where we are actually having a direct connection with real life examples. But I sincerely appreciate everything you're doing there. I know it's not easy, but just know sincere gratitude.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any additional questions or comments from the board? All right. Thank you, Aaron, for joining us and for all the work that you do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The fourth item on our reports agenda is a legislative update. Dr. Grant, do you want to introduce this as well?
Yes, we're in the middle of the legislative season and wanted to give you a mid-session update.
Whether we want it or not.
If you haven't heard all this on the news yet. Just a reminder, there are Friday meetings with the Joint Legislative Committee that I've appreciated so many board members and attending and paying, just following up on these bills and weighing in as superintendents and board members on those. Yandere Chatwin has been our designated legislative liaison and is staying up on this. And so just wanted to raise, I think, some of the more salient bills at the moment and where we are in the session.
Thank you, Superintendent. Board members, as you know, there are hundreds and hundreds of bills. I've pulled out 20-something, and I'm going to try to just give you top lines on them and tell you about a few things I think are critical for us to keep an eye on. I'll start out with two bills that have already passed and been signed by the governor. House Bill 257, sex-based designations for privacy, anti-bullying, and women's opportunities. We heard someone in public comment speak on this bill. It does include some strengthening of some Title IX language, but it requires people to use bathrooms and locker rooms in public schools and other government buildings that match their sex assigned at birth. It requires us us meaning schools, to create privacy plans for students who request that, whether that's having a gender-neutral bathroom, using a bathroom in the office. Of course, the concern there is that it will out some children who may not be ready for those steps. And I also wanted to add that the bill says that we will have satisfied the intent of the bill if we give students notice of these changes, if we take action to address any violations of this new law for bathroom usage, and if we are able to develop privacy plans for students who request those. There are also some provisions in the bill that state what can be used as a defense to an allegation of having used the incorrect bathroom, and that can be a student's unamended birth certificate indicating their sex assigned at birth, or documentation that a student has undergone medical treatment or a procedure consistent with the sex designation of the privacy space they've chosen to use. And as I mentioned, our governor has signed that into law. With both that bill and the one that I'm about to discuss next, House Bill 261, we do anticipate legal challenges, so TBD for the moment. The next, and feel free to stop me at any time if you have questions. House Bill 261, Equal Opportunity Initiatives. This bill prohibits public education system, including higher education institutions and other government employers, from requiring people in the interviewing process for hiring for a position to submit or ask any information related to protected categories that would promote differential treatment, or using an individual's certain characteristics in any decision-making aspects for employment or for education. It requires the state board, the state auditor, and other executive agencies to review our compliance and to report on that compliance regularly to the legislature. And it does a few other things. It says that we can't discriminate. It's a good thing, right? We also can't maintain any offices or divisions or employment positions that are specifically created to well, how do I phrase this tactfully? To promote certain individuals or to target certain groups over others. It requires us to provide student success centers and such programs to support all students regardless of any of their other individual characteristics. That's the general basis of that bill. And then I'll start with House Bill 1. For those who don't know, the legislature has a requirement that they have to pass budget bills by a certain point in the session early on in the first half. That way, if they aren't able to come to agreements towards the end of the session, we've at least got something, some sort of base bill. So this is the public education base budget bill. It has passed, and it sets the budget for fiscal year 25. It says that the WPU value is $4,443, and it provides a 3.8% inflationary adjustment. Again, that's just the base budget bill, so there's still a few things going through the process. This morning was the last meeting of the Public Education Appropriations Subcommittee, which means the next step is for the Executive Appropriations Subcommittee to meet and finalize some of those budgeting details. The next bill I'm flagging is House.
About
Yes.
the budget.
Yes.
So, not to diminish the other bills that you've already discussed, but something I'm hearing a lot about from constituents is in the base budget, the shift to block grants.
Yes.
And I know we've talked about that in JLC, but like many parents, I'm worried about the cuts to BTS Arts, but there's other things in that block grant, like gang involvement prevention money, that makes sense to target to certain districts. And as it is, it's all been rolled forward. And I know JLC was hesitant to oppose the base budget, given its myriad contents, like they don't want to not have a budget, as you pointed out in the process. But I'm wondering where we are as a district on articulating those budgeting needs, and I know that the applicable appropriations committees received a letter from our district arts coordinator about the BTS component, but I'm wondering if other departments like student services that would be impacted by those changes have sent letters, if we should be taking steps as a board to formalize our support that they do so when a budget cut would significantly impact the district, and how we articulate those impacts to both general education appropriations and public education appropriations.
Yeah, so the district isn't able to tell employees, certain advocacy activities that they may endeavor to take on their own. But what I have been doing is I've made sure that our legislators are aware, as well as other legislators on the Public Ed Appropriations Committee who don't represent our district, but who understand some of the unique needs points that we have here. Some of those concerns were actually brought up this morning. It overlapped with our cabinet meeting, so I didn't listen to the whole meeting, but I know that that specifically was brought up, that the gang prevention programs, there are districts like Salt Lake, Granite, that use more of that funding just due to the population we serve and the urban setting in which we are located, that maybe a district in rural Utah wouldn't need us in the same way that we do. So that is a concern. Because I wasn't able to finish that meeting, I'm not sure how that discussion ended up, but there was an assurance from Senator Fillmore that in the next fiscal year that LEAs would receive at least the amount, and likely a greater amount than they received this year for those programs, even with the change to that funding formula. I'll make sure I have an update for you on Friday for that particular question.
That's who I wanted to see.
Yeah, and like Alan, money Alan.
Particularly with those gang prevention monies, last I heard they're looking at rolling those into the at-risk add-on, which again, so
Is weighted.
it's weighted. So the last analysis I saw moving it to there, the Salt Lake School District would pretty much be even with that formula. The unfortunate part is they're moving it in there to say, because that at-risk amount is supposed to increase every year until they reach their target. Well, they're going to take that money that we already have, move it in there and say, see, we increased it.
That's exactly right.
So we're not going to really see an increase in those funds, but we also won't lose. So it's kind of like,
And in the case of, sorry, I'm just going to use up all my time, but in the case of something like BTS, let's say there becomes a shortfall because of the block grant. Because what I understand you're saying is that there's a commitment by Senator Fillmore to fund everything or just gang involvement?
He specifically was referencing gang prevention
Okay,
programs.
so like, let's say there's I think the cut from BTS Arts would be $181,000 is what I saw in the letter from the district.
well, just,
Is
I
there a plan
believe,
for that shortfall should it happen?
yeah, I believe Beverly Taylor has been moved out of this conversation. It's, as of last Friday, it was no longer in the conversation to roll into the WPU. But if it did, that's why the district keeps reserves. So we can address those, and as we have time to figure out how to handle things, that's what our reserves are really helpful to have.
Thank you.
So when you talk about block granting, I mean, it's the same thing as talking about backpack funding, right? I mean, they're just trying to roll everything into one thing instead of having specific line items to show that they're funding it. And I understand, sort of, when they talk about that, but it does exactly what Alan's describing, is that there isn't any fidelity to putting it into one line item and knowing that you're actually going to be getting the money, even though he says, it might be, not Alan saying this, but the legislature saying, that because it's weighted, you'll get that money. I just think it's so disingenuous to have that conversation about rolling so many things into a block grant instead of being able to say, this is what we're going to fund, and these are the reasons why we fund it, and this is why it's important to have it as a line item. This has been the ultimate thing that the legislature's always wanted to do, is to roll those into block grants, into specific line items into block grants, whether it's the Beverly Taylor Sorensen or the gang prevention or at risk or whatever. So it's just the way we're headed, Alan, is that it's just going to continue to be block granted, and that the state budget above the line is just going to be two things.
Two comments. So first of all, the first example is last year they took the library money and the nurses' money,
Right.
and rolled it into discretionary allocation.
Right.
Now, we as a district said we're going to keep those for the purpose that we've always had them, but we don't have to, and there's no other. Other districts may do different, but clearly we need library and nursing money. Some of what I hear is that districts have been asking this, that they want to simplify things, so that's why we're going to
Have more
roll everything in,
flexibility.
to have more flexibility. So, I mean, yes, that's a true statement, because, they peel off $1,000 and then you're spending $1,000 worth of reporting for that grant. And so looking for ways to simplify, but looking for ways to simplify while still increasing the overall pot should be the goal.
So how do we keep them accountable, for the things that really impact Salt Lake District? And I think that that's going to be a challenge, Because when you do have, the majority of voices maybe that are saying, here, we want more flexibility, so backpack it, and put it into a block grant, whatever you want to call it. It's hard on our level when we have so many level. I mean, we're just looking at a great piece about special ed and the growth of the number of kids coming in kindergarten that need IEPs. It's not going to stop. It's just going to continue to grow. So it's just something that I think that we as a district, as Ashley has said, we might not be able to direct our departments, to say this, and this, but we certainly as a district can say, nope, and we might be the minority voice saying that, but I think that we still have to raise the awareness of the injustice sometimes, of those inequities that keep coming up and affect our kids over and over and over again, because we're an urban district, one of the few urban districts in this state. And so it's distressing to me, understanding that that's the way that they're moving, but how do we now continue to advocate, through our superintendent and through our business administrator to raise awareness that we can't just keep throwing things into a block grant.
There was a valuable conversation on Friday at JLC about things that school districts can do. One of them was messaging from districts to encourage employees and constituents to participate in their neighborhood caucus meetings. That's where the process begins of determining who is elected to these positions, right? So
well, and I think also just to be really honest, I think the most powerful tool that a district has outside of their board are their school community councils. And if we educate our school community councils about what's going on, those are the voters. Those are the ones that can make a difference. And I just think that somehow as we think forward, Superintendent, about what's the information that we're going to give our school community councils, how are we going to educate them so that grassroots that we've been talking about really is growing.
Board Member Jensen.
That was part of the conversation. And when you're talking about the SCCs, if you're educating them, then hopefully you're also encouraging them to attend their caucuses. I mean, that's where they can, if they become delegates, they'll have a voice. And I think that's something that we can promote.
Thank you, Board Member Jensen. Board Member Bade or Board Member Sika?
would you like me to keep going?
Can I ask a question about the one budget? I know you have 20 more bills, sorry.
The next bill I'm flagging is House Bill 11, Water Efficient Landscaping Requirements, sponsored by one of our own, Representative Owens. And it restricts the use of turf for school property in the Great Salt Lake Basin. It designates certain other areas, but we're Great Salt Lake Basin, so this is the part that affects us. With new construction or reconstruction after May 1st of this year. So it has some formulas in there for our expert Isaac to figure out the percentage of the land that can be turf and what it can be used for and can't be used for. The goal of the...
Meaning grass.
It's turf or grass, yes, thank
Turf
you.
meaning grass, yeah.
Yes. The purpose is to conserve water and protect the Great Salt Lake. The next two bills are both related to sensitive materials. For the first one is House Bill 29, Sensitive Material Review Amendments. Both of these bills are sponsored by Representative Ken Ivory, who represents an area of the Jordan School District. The first thing that House Bill 29 does, it expands the pool of who can bring a challenge against a piece of literature, and that includes a student enrolled in the LEA, an employee of the LEA, a parent with a child in the LEA, or an elected official who represents any or all parts of that LEA, even if the school at which the challenge is happening is not in that person's specific district. When a challenge is brought, a change through this bill is that the material must be removed off the shelves while that process is taking place of reviewing that material. And if a material is deemed to be a sensitive material, it has to be communicated to the state board, because if at least 3 school districts in the state remove an item off their shelves, it has to be removed from all schools across the state. It's either 3 school districts or 2 school districts and 5 charter schools in the state. If that happens, then that's gone from everywhere. It requires the state board to establish a process for when districts are out of compliance, even if the material that is deemed a sensitive material was reviewed before this bill were to hypothetically take effect on July 1st. And it requires the Legislative Auditor's Office to conduct an audit of each school district to make sure that everyone's complying. And all the audits have to be done by November of 2028. They're also henceforth required to present annually to the Education Interim Committee on their findings from these audits. House Bill 417. So this bill is interesting. Currently, it expands the definition of what is an instructional material, and it says that all materials, so every single thing that a teacher might use has to be listed, has to be communicated to parents in advance, right? Even like the Trib article from this morning, that might be relevant to my social sciences class. There is a sub that has not been adopted yet that came out today that changes the bill entirely, and what it would then do is prohibit an LEA from passing a law that would prohibit the reading of sensitive materials in a public board meeting if that material is available in one or more of the schools of that LEA. So a bit of a different direction, but that substitute has not been adopted. I will keep you informed if it does get adopted. The next two bills relate to school safety. The first is House Bill 84. Oh, yes, Josiah.
Comment really quick. I actually got the chance to lobby yesterday at the Capitol and talk to Weiler about the past two bills. He's a co-sponsor on one of them.
Yes.
Correct me if I'm wrong, 29, right?
Yes, he's the Senate. Yes,
yeah.
thanks.
And he told me he's planning to make amendments to that one. So
yes, he is.
He's planning to amend the part where if 3 districts do it or 2 districts and 5 charters do it, then everyone has to do it. He's planning to amend that so it's every district on their own. And he's also planning to specify it so that you can't just choose to take historical books or like books that people may not like off of the shelves, like for example books about like Black History Month and stuff. If you're if parents in your district aren't per se liking that, you can't just take it off of the shelves. So he's planning to make amendments on that part of it.
Thank you for going up there too. That's so critical. Okay, House Bill 84. So this is sponsored by Representative Wilcox, who's kind of become the school safety guru up at the Capitol. And it's making its way through the legislature. This would require SRO training to be developed by the state security chief, so it kind of standardizes SRO training across the state. It establishes a school guardian program, which would require someone at every school who's either a school resource officer or an armed security guard to be at a school always. It also makes some changes to allow for data reporting from SafeUT to the state's intelligence databases. And just as a refresher, SafeUT is not only a critical mental health resource for students, it's also a place where anybody can submit a tip anonymously on school safety or any issues related to schools. So it's an important resource for us, and this change in the bill would allow for just more easily sharing data between that database and the state's intelligence databases. It requires a school safety and security director at the LEA level, as well as a school and security specialist at the school level, at every single school. It also, the last thing it does, it requires us to provide a panic alert device in every classroom and to make sure that our school security cameras are accessible by law enforcement. There's another bill that deals with school employees and firearms, House Bill 119. I do want to flag that this one is still in House Rules Committee, and if it's in House Rules Committee, it means it hasn't even been assigned or put on an agenda or discussed at all. So typically when bills remain in House Rules late into the session, it's a lower chance of them actually passing through, whereas House Bill 84 is making its way, and the sponsor is working hard to make sure it passes in both chambers. The one that's still in House Rules creates an educator protector program to incentivize employees to carry a firearm and would allow for providing a safe storage for that weapon on campus and some other things. But it specifically just deals with that piece. It doesn't include the other security components. House Bill 103, salary supplement for school speech language pathologists and audiologists, would make audiologists and some school speech language pathologists eligible for the teacher salary supplement program. I think this is like their 4th or 5th attempt to get this bill through. So we'll see what happens with that one. House Bill 105, educator expense modifications. I feel like Alan has something to say. No? Okay. Provides.
Which one was it? Sorry.
No, it's okay.
I was multitasking.
I saw you pointing. I thought you wanted to talk about school speech language pathologists getting a bonus. Okay.
No, but just so that program is, so there's several teachers and school employees that already qualify for a bonus. I believe, let's see, Logan's not here. I think it's like $4,500 a year. It could be each half the year. Special ed teachers, teachers with math degrees, teachers with science degrees, they keep expanding the qualifying teachers, and this is just another way to expand that further.
Yeah, and in the committee hearing, they talked about all the folks who are involved in serving our special education students and being part of IEP meetings, and audiologists and speech language pathologists are often among those individuals. So the justification is that they are just as deserving of that salary supplement as the other educators that Alan just listed. House Bill 105 is a tax credit. It's a $500 tax credit for elementary educators, K-6, if they spend their personal funds on classroom supplies, and that tax credit is only $250 for educators in secondary grades from 7 to 12. It's currently written as a one-time. The sponsor was not feeling confident that there are funds to keep this going, in perpetuity, but it's at least a one-time tax credit for educators. The next two bills, House Bill 121, educator background check amendments. This would prohibit an LEA from charging a background check fee to a licensed employee or a non-licensed substitute teacher, and it allows entities, government entities, to share information. So if I'm a substitute teacher in the Salt Lake School District and I've already had a background check, well then Salt Lake can share that with Granite School District, so we don't have to pay for that again, which seems smart. House Bill 221, stipends for future educators. This bill would provide a $6,000 stipend for student teachers during the semester they're student teaching. The sponsor estimated that about 1,400 teachers would qualify every year, and it's part of the legislature's efforts to look at how to recruit and retain educators, knowing that, especially while being in school full-time, that students are short on funds, and this would make it easier for them to complete their teaching degrees and get into the teaching workforce. Next one, House Bill 192, local education agency employee paid leave. So this bill has changed a little bit. It's sponsored by Representative Ballard and requires LEAs to create a leave bank policy that would be accessible to all employees. I've spoken about this one with Logan Hall over HRS, and I know certain employee categories within our district do have access to a leave bank, but not all. This would require all employees to access that leave bank, even if they're not full-time. If they're not full-time, it would be prorated how much leave they could access, and it's for the purpose of postpartum recovery leave or parental leave. And the goal, the way that this was shaped is it matches the benefits, the leave benefits for state employees. When that bill passed a couple of years ago, it did not include LEA employees, and the sponsor is trying to extend those same benefits to employees in public education. It also, so that's at the LEA level. At the school level, it provides a mechanism for sharing leave of different types, so not just postpartum and parental, but also sick leave, annual leave, other types of leave, but within the same school. And it prohibits an LEA from taking retaliatory action against an employee who uses that leave. The Senate sponsor is Senator Ann Milner, which tells me it has a strong likelihood of passage. House Bill 287, Advanced Degree Scholarship Program. This is a bill from Representative Carol Moss that would create a program to provide educators with scholarships to pursue graduate degrees, a master's or another degree related to the field in which they are currently teaching in an LEA, and would again serve as a way to help retain our teachers. For many of our educators, the way to advance in their careers and pay especially is through furthering their own education, but that's really tough to do. So this would make it easier for some of our educators to do that. It's a $20 million fiscal note, and it's set up as a 5-year pilot. Next bill also deals with teacher retention. It is called Teacher Retention, House Bill 431. It requires the state board to create an educator support hotline, which allows educators to call and ask for professional support or resources, allows them to report an LEA that is engaging in practices that make the job of the educator more difficult, prevent them from doing their job. It allows them to ask about state board offered professional development opportunities. It's a resource for educators, essentially. So it has 3 components. That's the first one. The second one is it creates a master teacher program. So we've heard some in our district about teacher leaders and some of that work that's happening in some of our schools. So this would create a 2-year pilot program to allow schools to do that, to allow master teachers to mentor other teachers to still remain as teachers, but to be able to share their skills and knowledge and expertise with other fellow educators. And the third thing that this bill would do is require all LEAs to provide 3 weeks of paid parental or postpartum recovery leave to employees. Next 2 bills deal with local school boards. So House Bill 161, school board amendments. I'll preface this by saying that both of these passed out of House committee yesterday with strong margins. So the first bill, House Bill 161 from Representative Shipp, says that subject to certain exceptions, the bill provides that a law passed by a local school board, including one imposing a new tax or a tax increase, can be referred to voters for referendum for direct approval or rejection. House Bill 173 does something similar. It's specific to taxes, though. It says that a law passed by a local school board that increases a tax or imposes a new tax can be referred. And it includes some other interesting language. It talks about the local school board being the Board of School District canvassers in a hypothetical referendum election. It also potentially expands the duties of our business administrator in helping to administer that canvass after an election. And attendance of a simple majority of the local school board is a quorum for purposes of a canvass under this. I also do want to note that with this bill, House Bill 173, it's sponsored by Representative Candace Pierucci, who is the House Education Chair. And this was a bill that Alan and I observed that there were several members of the committee that weren't participating for most of the meeting, but took the time to come in, particularly members of leadership, to come in and make sure that they voted in support of this bill. So again, tells us some information. House Bill 331, classroom amendments. The main purpose of this one is to just say that kindergartners must be toilet trained before entering kindergarten. It requires parents to provide assurances that the student is toilet trained and has a process for supporting the family with like a social worker or other things if the student is found to not be toilet trained, and then a process for the student's re-entry to the classroom. And it does allow accommodations for students with IEPs or 504s or other unique situations, knowing that is sometimes the case with young children. House Bill 415, school fees amendments, has not been heard yet, but has been recently assigned to the House Ed Committee, so it will be heard soon. It phases out school fees over a period of 5 years. I think this is our 5th year seeing a bill like this, and yet again, it has no fiscal note for us to cover the cost of those school fees. House Bill 172, immigrant student athlete participation amendments, just says that for students who are homeless or who are not U.S. citizens, that other documents can be used to confirm their date of birth and their sex under certain circumstances. So it just makes it a little easier for students in these unique situations to be able to participate in athletics. House Bill 182, student survey amendments, requires parental consent for any non-academic survey. The sponsor is concerned about the number of non-academic surveys that are administered to our students, and she wants to streamline that process. The consent has to be obtained annually in writing and has to be obtained again if a student moves mid-year to a new LEA. Senate Bill 92, Student Communications Methods, it requires local school boards to approve LEA policies that allow for students to have non-electronic notification and access to school events and activities, including coursework, information on schedule changes, extracurricular activities, and the emergency response plans of the school or the LEA. The exception to this, because moving to non-electronic means of coursework requires us to not be on Canvas anymore, right? The exception is if we provide an electronic device to every student and that device is capable of receiving notifications, and also in unforeseen emergencies. In a true emergency, you can send out a notification. As Alan mentioned earlier in this meeting, we are a one-to-one district. However, as I understand, not all of our schools actually distribute those devices. If this bill were to pass, we would need to actually distribute those to students in order to maintain the types of communications that we currently engage in with students. And this bill just governs student communication, not parent communication. So that's Senate Bill 92. I am almost done. 3 more. Senate Bill 177, Absenteeism Prevention Amendments. This bill would allow a school-aged child's grade to include attendance, but only if incorporation is deemed appropriate by the teacher and the parent gives written permission for that to be the case. So if my child is struggling with attendance and I want a little Johnny to, be impacted, be a little more motivated due to their grades, then I can say, yes, please make that a factor in their final grade in this class. Senate Bill 105, Student Privacy and Modesty in Public Education, sponsored by Senator Jen Plum, who represents our district. Would protect student privacy and personal modesty in our schools and bathrooms, locker rooms. We are presumed to be in compliance if we have a student who requests a privacy accommodation and we provide it by either a single occupant facility, floor to ceiling walls or doors, or even a curtain sectioning off a private area for a student to change, like in a locker room or a PE class or something like that. And the last bill I will tell you about, Senate Bill 122, Youth Apprenticeship Governance Structure Amendments. This is sponsored by Senator Milner, and her purpose is to create a youth apprentice governance study. So working with the GOEO and the DWS, Talent Ready Utah, the study would look at how to encourage more students to participate in apprenticeships. It would also include employers in the study to make sure that we really are looking at all the ways to expand opportunities. Her goal is to create kind of a template for what an apprenticeship program should look like so that others who want to engage in such programs have an easier time doing so with a vetted template for how to do it. Do you have any questions for me?
Member Jensen?
Andre, I really appreciate your explanation, and I appreciate how you give those weekly updates and email those out to us with the legislation. For me, I think, and I appreciated when you were referring to fiscal notes that are attached to those pieces of legislation, because I think for those of us that have been regularly attending the Joint Legislative Committee meetings, the real challenge is, okay, we have that general education fund, and without, giving all the titles and the acronyms and all of that, my recollection is there's about $450 million in that fund. And with these different pieces of legislation, yeah, they're beneficial, but I think that we as a board have to prioritize which ones we think are the most critical ones for the students in our district, because there's not enough money in that pot to pay for all of these good ideas, or things where they want to create better educational situations. I think that for us as a board, if we're going to, start encouraging our legislators, we need to prioritize the ones that we think will use that money most wisely for us.
Yeah, and for anyone who might be listening and doesn't know what a fiscal note is, when you go to the legislative website and you look at a bill, on the right side there are some links, and one of those links is usually a fiscal note. They're not always there at the beginning of the session, but at this point more of them have that fiscal note. If you click on it, it tells you what the financial impact is of that bill, so you know how much it'll cost and who will be taking up that cost. Is it the state board? Is it from
Right.
this fund or that fund? So yeah,
I
that
mean,
information
some
is
of
helpful.
those, by the fiscal note, will be 240 million.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there goes half of it right there.
Yeah, and the problem with bills like the school fees bill that has no fiscal note, that means that they want us to absorb the cost. There's no funding provided from the legislature for that, and that's a huge cost to LEAs.
Board Member Sweater.
Thanks. Yandri, thank you. I know the time and energy that it takes, to provide the information that you have been, and appreciate your attendance, at the JLC meetings. I think that it seems to me, and it would be interesting to know your insight on this, that this year there is an inordinate amount of vendor bills and pet projects that have really risen to the top in a lot of these bills. And as we go to the JLC meeting, or as we talk with our representatives, what would be some strategies that we could use to really pull us back away? I mean, I think we did really well at pulling back away from vendors and pet projects, for a number of years, but now it just seems like there's a resurgence again this year.
Yeah, no, an observation that made last week is that it was week 3 last week, and we're in the 400s numbering for bills. Mm-hmm. I think we didn't hit that till last session. So there are already as many bills halfway through the session as there were in the entire session last year. And naturally that'll lead to more vendor bills and bills of all kinds. I do think that it's important to look, and that's why there's value in listening to the committee meetings. It's good to read on the website what the bills say. Again, for those who aren't as familiar with the website, there's a tab that says status on every bill. You can click and see if a committee has voted on it, if the full House has voted, or Senate, and there's link there to the audio, sometimes the video of the discussion that was held on that bill, where you can catch some of the nuances there. Sometimes if it is a vendor bill, the bill sponsor will bring someone with them, and the presentation won't be presented by the legislator, but by someone else. Those are things to stay on top of and flag. So I think that's one way for us to just be aware, and members of the community can do that. Even if they're not able to attend in person or listen in real time, those recordings are available. I will give props and kudos to the folks who maintain the legislative website, because it is useful, helpful, and easy to navigate. And if you want an even easier way to navigate and you use Google Chrome, talk to me and I'll help you download a Chrome extension.
Yeah, that's great.
Member Bade?
Where should I start? It is so sad, to see the bills like against diversity, equity, and inclusion. I don't know, some schmuck somewhere in the country just got up one day and wanted to enforce this across the country. And the sad reality is this, this is a country that is built. What makes this country beautiful is the fact that it's diverse. And it's the fact that, it is inclusive. And it is very sad, because these are just kind of bills that are like targeting marginalized communities or disenfranchised communities. But us as a district, I know our motto is always about inclusion. It is always about diversity and equity. And I want the community that is listening right now, especially those who feel that they are disenfranchised, they feel they don't belong, they feel threatened. I want them personally, this is me as Mohammed speaking, want them to feel that and know that this is a place that is safe for them, that this is a place that, will make sure that they feel loved and included. that this is a place where they'll be able to, meet people from all walks of life, and they will not be, singled out. This is hard. It's really, I don't know how to explain it to you. You just take the words as they are. We don't care about diversity, basically. We do not care about equity, and we do not care about inclusion. Basically, we can choose and do what we want. If we want this place to be all white, we're going to make it do, and you can't sue us. And to me, that is just appalling. That is just so inhumane. And there's just I just want to let these people know, if they are listening, to ask themselves, whomever they believe in as a power being, what would they do? What would they do? Would they go and take care of the homeless children or homeless people? Would they go and make sure that no child is spending the night without food? Would they go and make sure the health care is available to those who are actually in need of that health care? No, I don't think that they are thinking that way. And I really hope to God that some form of revelation or inspiration will come to them and help them wake up and really know that these are just human beings. They all have spent 9 months in their mother's wombs, and they came the same way we've come. And once their journey is over, we're all going to share the same dirt. At that point, it's not going to matter what skin color you are, where you're from, whatsoever. Death does not discriminate in any way whatsoever. So that's my hope. Whoever is listening, that this will be a wake-up call.
Thank you, Board Member Babe. Board Member Sweat.
So I think that I'm going to reflect back on something that was said during our request to speak, and it made me think about, the challenges that we have as a state, but yet that Salt Lake District has risen, and been that phoenix at times. And you think about, years ago when the state really had no value or saw no value in kindergarten and how important kindergarten was. And so our district said, well, that's great, that's how the state feels, but this is what our district's going to do. And I want to say the same thing about what you're talking about right now, Mohammed, because built within, the DEI conversations that we're having, hopefully there's flexibility within our district to be able to say, that's great, let's be compliant with this, but here's the flexibility that we can use within our district to say we value diversity and equity and inclusion. And so this is how we'll do it within the boundaries, of the law to be compliant, but yet also step outside that box and say, how can we now provide the things that we know our children need in our district? And I hope that going forward, after I step off this board, that you never lose sight of that. That if you're going to be the flagship, in the state, then it's going to be hard things that you're going to have to do sometimes, and you're going to be the odd man out, in some of those conversations. But every time I look back on the things that we've done as a district, whether it's been, talking about our classifications and including gender identity, or, just the statement alone, that we say every child, every day, every classroom, that you don't lose sight of that, because there's always something that we can say, that's great, we'll be compliant with this, but let's make sure, that we're doing the things that we need to do to protect our kids and provide the best learning, safe environment that our students in our city can expect from Salt Lake City School District.
Thank you, Board Member Sweat. Any other comments or questions for Yandri?
Thank you.
Thank you, Yandri. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Yandri.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, our next agenda item is school closure and boundary adjustment transition activities. Before I turn the time over to Superintendent Grant, I just want to acknowledge that this is a real sensitive topic, as we know, based on the public comments this evening, and just ask that the audience maintain decorum as the superintendent gives her updates, along with respect for her and her staff.
Oh, thank you. A big shout out to our leaders in the district, and particularly to school principals right now, who are picking up the the responsibility to smooth the transition for families in schools that were affected by closure or by boundary changes, and how much they've done in the last few weeks to try and reach out to their communities and to provide important information. We've been focusing at the front end right now on providing information about open enrollment, the ability of families to apply to be in different schools. There have been open houses that have been held at all of the schools that are affected in this to try and share information about their school programs and their teachers and what they're doing, and those have really gone well. They have, there's neat things going on in our schools, and it's a chance for the teachers to showcase that and to share with a broader community what they are doing in those schools. So I want to thank the community for pulling together to do that. There's been a lot of information to parents about open enrollment processes. We just closed the typical open enrollment period last week. This week just opened the new special open enrollment period that is for those families who are impacted by these decisions on closure and boundary changes. So they have until, if I'm right, February 18th in order to submit an open enrollment application that way. Schools are also setting up computer supports and providing supports within their schools to help people navigate that process if they need to. They're attending to special education transitions. We've talked about that, about students moving to new schools and what that means. That's done often in schools, but just, again, attending to it. One of the things we're doing is also attending to the transition of curriculum supplies from classroom to classroom, and so we're going to be designating areas where people can put their books, and then those will be moved to the new schools where they're needed. So everything across the board is on the table about what we're trying to do to ease transitions. You saw that we have made the administrative placements in elementary schools for our leaders there. Teachers now know who the leaders will be in schools as they make their decisions and requests for where they want to be placed. And we will have those staffing assignments completed by March 15th. Early staffing allocations that that Alan's team does, the fiscal piece with HR and Logan Hall. The early staffing allocations went out to schools. Those are just the early staffing allocations that allow principals to start making some early plans, but then as the year progresses and we get a better sense of how many students will be in the schools, there'll be some updates in the registrations by July. Sam and his team, with Yandri's help, have put out a survey to families to try and get an early read just on what they're interested in attending, to help us start to plan for that. So no obligation, but just where do you think you're going as a family? So again, we can get better and better at those staffing and allocations. So staffing assignments will be made by March 15th. And so these early allocations may be supplemented, particularly for those schools who are receiving a lot of students, because we'll have more teachers then to allocate after these early assignments of FTEs in the schools. So we're at that point in this. By March 15th, we'll have that completed, and then moving on that way. I also wanted to highlight a couple of things that we are doing to ensure that our the programs that are serving families outside of the school day, and these are our after-school programs, our summer learning program, as well as community programs that are serving students, serving families through our schools. So there are a number of community organizations that use the schools to help deliver services or programs. So our team is working to connect with those organizations to see if there's ways we can provide alternatives through our school system, or to help them provide alternatives in the communities to provide those services. And then our after-school team and our with the summer learning program are setting that up for the new year too, so that it's in schools that are accessible We won't be holding after school in schools that are closing. We won't, let me say that again. We won't be holding the summer learning program in schools that are closing down. But we will be keeping the same number of seats. And hopefully, we're working on some fiscal things so we can staff well to try and meet more of the demand for both summer learning and after school in the coming years. So just wanted to give you an update on some of those transition activities that we're doing. And we'll have more to say at the next board meeting as we continue on this, because we're looking at this every week to make sure that we're staying on top of the details and particularly trying to help with the communication in schools. So if we're missing somewhere, please let us know, and we're trying to adjust to that.
Any questions?
Any questions on that?
Board Member Jensen, then Anderson.
Yep.
I was trying to write down the different dates, and I hope that I got them. Is there a way that you could just like send out an email or something that,
I'll ask, do you mean about staffing?
well, I mean, there was March 15th that was staffing assignments, but then like the second phase of open enrollment and, you know, when those dates, I mean, I think it's just helpful when,
Yes, open enrollment, the special open enrollment is February 5th.
okay,
So this last Monday, yesterday, till February 19th, actually. I got to get the right date, 19th. I'm looking at my team for confirmation on this. February 19th.
It's, I was just trying to look, I think it's the Friday, it's the
Yeah.
Friday of that week. So I'm just trying to look for the date.
Okay. Is the application deadline that way?
okay.
It's the 19th, thank you. So that's one set of dates. The other is just the annual assignment
Yeah,
of
assignment of
faculty.
staffing.
So the date to complete that is March 15th.
Okay, I got that. Administration appointments, was there a date there, or is that just ongoing?
That's just completed.
Okay.
That is completed.
I've seen those
For the
emails.
elementary schools, we just announced a few more changes in our secondary schools. One of the things that's so interesting, and I need to highlight this actually, is that we had anticipated a certain amount of turnover in staff when we decided as a district to keep all of the jobs, to keep all of our people in the district, even if schools are closing. Now that we have allocated all of the administrators and have seen some retirements and some changes in position there, we actually do not have any additional administrators to allocate to schools. We came out even on that one with the changes in things. So it was nice to be able to announce that we're keeping those positions and that we have come out even in the budget as a district. Teachers, it'll be a little different, but we assumed that because there's more teachers. So that natural transition and attrition across those positions will probably take another year, perhaps two, in order to even out. So the cost, I think, to us as a district in keeping those positions was perhaps less than we may have anticipated, but I think was really important to do in stating what kind of district we are and the support we provide to our staff and how we want to keep valuable people on hand to be serving our kids over the coming years. So really pleased with how that has turned out.
Any additional questions?
Thank you.
Oh, thanks.
Board Member Anderson and then Board Member Sweat.
Sure. Admittedly, this is not a question. It is a comment based on some of the emails I've received where families have gone to open houses and they've noticed there's really different opportunities at some schools.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to use those messages as kind of a springboard during the transition update to remind families that some parts of transition are within control, such as what you raise of the district, and in some cases even the board. But a lot of activities at a school are really created by the community through school community councils, parent-teacher organizations, but also just the community at large. So as some examples, in the transition, it wouldn't be reasonable for me as a board member to tell a school they shouldn't use their land trust funding to make a full-time visual art teacher, and I instead ask them to pay for dance. I couldn't do that. And I really also wouldn't want to tell a PTA they had to stop funding a hands-on science teacher and ask them to contract with a theater group or hire a math tutor. And so part of the differences a parent may be seeing as they go to these offerings at open houses is not really a failure to equalize enrichment, but instead might be based on what parent communities have created over time. And as new families are engaging in those communities and needs are shifting, I would encourage anyone writing or speaking to the board about that process to also be part of generating those shifts by communicating their interests and ideas to existing groups. And there is one way that the board enters the fray of that work of principals and SICs, and that's when we approve land trust plans, like you noticed on tonight's consent agenda. And state guidance tells us if we notice that all schools were spending land trust money on enrichment, that we would then as a board have to intervene and offer those things uniformly. But the common need we see in land trust plans is academic interventionists. And so that would ask us, as the board in this budget cycle, to consider why that intervention is routinely needed despite our robust funding across academic units. So what I'm trying to say is, as parents inevitably find gaps between their new school and their past experience, I think by all means they should articulate to the board what they'd like to see offered across the district. But I do want to mutually acknowledge those layers of governance that led to choosing those things, and that it's not, in many cases, reasonable to ask us to, kind of replicate those programs when they happen at the grassroots level. So thank you for
Board
letting
Member
me
Anderson.
share that.
You explained that very well. And I think what people will see as we're putting communities together is the community that comes together may choose a different approach in the future, may choose to bring something from the previous school to the new school, for example, in those community conversations. Thank you for explaining that.
Board Member Sweat?
Thank you. Thank you for that update, Superintendent. Some of the letters that I'm getting about the open enrollment process, I don't know if Bryce and Jenny are experiencing the information or the frustration that's come from the Hawthorne community. Could you walk us through what the district's process is in notifying our families of those open enrollment dates? Because what I'm hearing is that they're not really getting information into the home. So I don't know if a letter has been sent to individual families. Like if you take the community of Hawthorne, are those letters going into each individual home saying, this is when you need to be able to participate in the open enrollment piece? There's just been a little bit of confusion about that. And where I haven't been clear about it, I haven't wanted to try and say anything because I wasn't sure what the process was that the district was using.
Yeah, we're trying to communicate in a number of ways. Yandri, do you want to help me with this? We sent emails out to families early on after the decision was made to explain that process. They were tailored to their community. So if you're in this program at this school, here are your options and how to think about this. So we sent out, I think, 11 different versions of those emails to try and tailor it to the needs of different groups in the community.
Okay.
We also have up on the websites, perhaps the easiest place to go there or to ask an administrator in the school for help in navigating their choices. But on the website, on the name of the page is the open enrollment page, right? It even has flow charts that walk people through what their decision structure is based on if there's a special assignment in a school, if they have a special permit, if they are in a particular program, that sort of thing. And it helps walk them through what their choices are in that open enrollment. So we've tried to make it really clear, but anything that's a suggestion that way to get this information out, the schools each have announcements about the open enrollment. They're in the schools, I believe, is that right?
Yeah, and if you want me to share some of the other ways.
Yes,
But before you do that, and you're probably going to say yes, but I just want to ask the question. So when a parent goes to the website or as they get a letter, has Are we taking into consideration the multiple languages?
Thank you.
And how are those identified? Is it identified through the school? Does the school say to you, this family needs to have that information in Spanish? This family needs to have it in French? I mean, whatever, how are we dealing with that? Because that's the other piece of it is, is the translation coming through either on the website or through the letters?
Yeah, so our website will translate. Up at the top, folks can, bottom left corner on a browser, select the language in which they want to see the website, which will translate everything that's not a PDF into that designated language. And when folks go to our website, open enrollment is the first slide on the homepage there because we know right now that's what folks are looking for. When we sent those 11 different letters on the night that the board voted, we followed that up by the end of that week on Friday with an individualized letter. So, dear parents of Susie, this is what happened on Tuesday at the board meeting. Here's how it impacts Susie. Here are your options for Susie. And if Susie was in a special program, then Susie's parents also got information on where that program was moving. If they felt like they wanted to pursue a different option, here's the open enrollment information. So we worked with Sam to make sure that each family got info tailored to their student, not just for their school, but for their individual kid. So they had the right information. Additionally, at the open houses that all the impacted schools are holding, we've created a flyer that summarizes that information. So all the schools have a flyer. The translation department is helping us to get those in the languages that the schools have requested. We rely on them for that. They know the languages that they need the most. So we are providing that information, hard copies, in addition to the web information. Tomorrow, families will receive, they received an email last week reminding them that the early open enrollment period was closing. And when families receive an email, the school messenger software that we use will select the language the family has chosen at registration. So if they've chosen to receive it in Vietnamese, that email will come through in Vietnamese, even though I wrote it in English. And then tomorrow, families will receive information not just about the special open enrollment period, but all elementary families will also be getting information about dual language. We're trying to make sure that we're not just giving the enrollment info, but also the program info. And I'm working with Dr. Parsons and Dr. Malouf on making sure that we're coordinating messaging on those. For dual language immersion, for example, typically families will apply through the open enrollment process. After meeting with Dr. Malouf, I now know that if there's room in the programs, even after the open enrollment deadlines, that families are still able to contact the principal and see if there's a spot for that program. So tomorrow, families will get dual language info, even though that open enrollment period closed, because there may still be an opportunity for their child to be part of that program. So we're trying to take the nuance into account, and I'm grateful for the other departments helping me to make sure that we're getting the right information to the right people.
I appreciate that explanation. That helps. I think it's good for our families to be hearing this. Hopefully some are listening.
Yeah.
But I also think, so maybe as a cautionary, just to say, we put these steps in, but how do we get feedback to know that it's actually getting out? Whether it's through maybe our school community council chairs or through the principal, however we can work that out. I think that would be important, to follow through on that piece of it. Also, Superintendent, I would just say, use your discretion that if we need more flexibility with those dates, let's have that flexibility. So that, it's a trying time anyway. And so to be able to extend it past the 19th if need be, to consider that. And then my last, do I still have a little bit of time? My last thing is, with the transition of our programs going into other schools, so I'll just give you the example of Nibley, not thinking that you're going to give answers tonight, but maybe in a future update. Some of the questions that have come up is, how have you done an assessment of space in the building? When you're moving the DLI over, to Nibley, what kind of assessment have you done on the building to make sure it can handle the program, and if it's being done in phases, just to disseminate that information out so that people would know, are you doing a K through 6, DLI right off the bat, or are you phasing in if there's not enough room? Which led to, is the K-8 going to stay a K-8? Is the 7th and 8th grade going to continue to stay at Nibley, and is there space for it even though the program is shrinking? And so as a future conversation, I think that those are just some of the questions that are coming out of the community as we've moved that program over there and also shifted, a population, over to Nibley also.
It may be helpful to clear some of that up right now. Because Nibley has a lot of classrooms, there is a lot of space there because it's one of our bigger buildings. That is one of the reasons why a DLI program fits there. So we looked at classrooms, we looked at actually square footage of rooms in thinking about what's a classroom space, what's just a small meeting room, what's a gym, I don't know. And looked at all those spaces in all of the buildings that we were looking at. And then when making those determinations, can DLI go there, looking at the classroom needs of DLI, and we're putting in the Emerson ELP DLI will move there. Right. And then there will be a K6, Tiffany, correct me please if I'm wrong, K6 DLI program that will start. It won't grandfather in, it's starting right away.
Okay.
So those classes may grow over time as the neighborhood becomes more accustomed to having that program right there.
I think that's super helpful.
And there's enough room that it doesn't crowd out 7 and 8. Just to answer that question. The question of the future of 7 and 8 can be a later topic with the community there and all, but.
I would say that even having this conversation, just a little bit of that, to think about now, how do we get that out to the community? Yeah. Because right now it's pretty centralized just within the building, with the teachers and the staff. Okay. And so I think that, just figuring out now, how do we have a meeting or a community meeting or whatever you want to call it, open house, whatever, just so the community can come in and ask questions about it.
Yes, I think that's right. And as we get to spring eventually, those meetings, I think, will happen more and more. The welcome meetings into the new places for families to come, both as a welcome to the new site, but also informational. I think that's important. You're right.
May I add one more thing I forgot
Yes.
for Board Member Sweat? One other critical way that we're getting information out, specifically on supporting families through open enrollment, is through the principals. Each of them is hosting, and I'll clarify, each of the principals who's been impacted by school closure or schools who are losing students due to boundary realignment, they're holding in-person hours for families who may not have access to internet at home to come physically to the buildings to fill out an open enrollment application if that's what they would like to do. So I just want to throw that.
How are they doing that outreach, Chandri? I mean, how do they identify the families that don't have internet, and then how do they do that outreach to bring them in?
It's open to anyone in the school. Most of them are pairing it with their open house or family night. So it's a time where families are already naturally coming into their buildings, and they'll have those computer labs available and staff who can support families who might not know how to navigate that process. So I wanted
Going out to all of the families that are in a section that was moved to a different school.
Yeah.
So all of those families without an understanding of their resources or not, they're invited in.
Advertise school-wide. And I want to thank the principals because that is a big lift to provide that in-person opportunity for families, but it's critical for a lot of our community members.
Vice President Williams and then Board Member Jensen.
Yeah, I had a few questions. Board Member Sweat actually asked a handful of those already, so thank you for doing that. I had questions about translation and the possible extension of the open enrollment period. One of the things I'm curious about, and talking about allowing families to come in who may not have internet access and things of that nature, and I didn't bring this up yet because I was curious about waiting to hear how this information was going out. But at the Mary W. Jackson SEC meeting last week, one of the things parents said that they would appreciate is actually having a printed copy about open enrollment sent out. So I'm hoping that that might be something we can accommodate.
That's what Yondri's put together with the flyer that's there at the school. Did they want that sent to their homes?
I think
Is that what
they said maybe even if it came home with the kids.
Came home with the kids?
Yeah.
Thank you, Yondri.
Board Member Jensen and then Board Member Bate.
One of the things that I have heard is that they've been also trying to help during parent-teacher conferences And I think that that's a way that we could encourage schools that are, experiencing that, is when those children and their parents are coming in for parent-teacher conference, to explicitly ask them, are you being serviced the way that you need to be serviced with this transition?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's happening. Well, right now, parent-teacher conferences are occurring, or starting to occur.
That's a good point. Let me bring that up with the team, to have the principals asking what else we can do, in a sense, right? What else might be helpful? Let me mention one thing about the extension of the date. This kind of cuts both ways. Some families have expressed real frustration that they won't know until March whether or not they're able to get in with the open enrollment, because we made a special open enrollment period and tried to give it enough time that families would have a month at least from the closure date to get a sense of their options and then enroll. So if we extend, it serves perhaps some needs, but I think it cuts the other way, in that families become frustrated that the decision is so delayed and they're living in uncertainty and things. So I'd be hesitant unless we're hearing of real systemic problems of information flow. And one of the things, Sam is collecting information on all of the open enrollments that we've gotten so far, and things, so that we can see how many people are taking this up, and can try and understand systemically whether or not the communication is working a bit. But hearing from you this way, we'll keep working on that communication with our team.
Thank you for those detailed information. I know this is like a bit of a stressful process, I can only imagine. This is a very, very critical moment right now, is this, step of paving the path to something that's going to be permanent for a while. And so I'm going back to the communication part. So having letters go to families is really, really important, because it'll cover the ground for those who have phones or not. Also put a QR code in there that would, families can scan, and it'll help them do translation if they need a translation. I'm thinking here of refugee community, immigrant communities, people who do not speak English, and, they already feel, insecure enough. And I want to make sure that the information that are provided to them are as clear as could be. And for heaven's sake, you got a person here who speaks Arabic and French. If you have anyone that needs any understanding of anything, get in touch with me. I'll be more than happy to take care of that, please.
I've seen that work at an open house where you've helped out that way.
Yes. Just send them to me. It doesn't matter what kind of Arabic they speak. Just send them to me. I'll be more than happy to help them with that. Also, get letters to community leaders. Let's say, for example, places of worship. It could be within the Polynesian community leadership. And so anyone that we know that's a community, they will have their own way of conveying those messages. Because, us minorities, we have our network, and that network is run by leadership, and those information are actually going to go, filter really through well. I cannot stress enough the importance of getting this information. I mean, if a person that speaks English cannot understand or does not know what the process is, what does it feel like to someone who's English, who does not speak the language? So please, again, I am here, to speak to anyone that needs help understanding that. And please, and if I do not speak the language, I promise you I'll find someone out there who does. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Bade.
And thank you, Yandri, for helping us out with that.
Any other questions or comments? All right. Seeing none, we'll transition into item number 6. On the reports agenda, board and board leadership evaluations. Bryce and I really just wanted to give a quick update. We are in the process of compiling information and criteria that's been sent to us from you all. We also are going to seek some clarification on a couple of different questions that have come our way. But we also want to acknowledge that we've received some different points of feedback relative to, one, the timing and the setting of the meeting, that we would evaluate the results from that evaluation tool. So we had prescribed the 20th as our potential date to have Richard bring results to the board. But it seems like we also might need some more time to think about that as a board. But I would open it up for any questions or comments that folks have about all the various realms that I just addressed and what we're trying to do. We do want to move forward as a leadership team, and I know the board does as well, but we just need to iron out a few of the different points of feedback that we've been hearing from the board so far. Christy?
So I think that with the conversation that we're going to be having about our calendar, that I would like to suggest that we, once Mr. Stoll compiles the information after we've taken the evaluation, that we not do that on a board meeting night, that we choose another night as a board. I think it's more productive, for us, when you're under the gun with time, if we're going to do it, for a work session would only be an hour, but to do it also during the public business, I think, that we still have to notice it. People could still, come to the board room if they wanted to, and listen in if they wanted to hear, about that. But to be able to provide us a time that we can sit together as a board and kind of go through that and not feel like we're under the gun with looking at the clock. So I would suggest that when we get to that part, maybe we could look at our calendars and see if there's, or maybe even have April send out a doodle, poll, that we could identify some dates that we could come in. Because I think that, I feel that an evaluation deserves a little bit more time. And, to be able to sit down and really talk about some of the things that we have identified or that we'd like to see as improvements. So when we move to that piece, maybe that might be where we would have that conversation?
Yeah, for sure, and that's well received because one of the elements of that calendaring is finding consensus on a board retreat date, which we weren't able to find, so we're going to have to send out a new poll for that.
We could do a
anyhow,
two-part.
so we could do a two-part poll.
A two-part poll.
Excellent.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. But do keep in mind that would mean that we would not be conducting the results discussion on the 20th.
On the 20th, right.
So if that's something that the board is in agreement to and we push that to a later date in March, that's something that we're open to for sure. Any other comments or questions? I guess just.
Could I just ask
please.
that when I got the poll about the retreat, there was only one date on the poll.
Right.
Okay.
So
I only had one date too.
It would be helpful if, with both of these items, there were multiple dates.
Yeah.
Okay. We can ask that. Am I getting the sense from the board that we would want to have a separate?
Oh, I do.
Well, I feel that way. I mean, I think that if we're going to do an evaluation, we need to take not if, we said that we wanted to have an evaluation. And if we're going to have an effective evaluation, we need to take the time to do it.
Agree.
And I agree with Christy that if we have it separate, then we aren't under that time pressure.
Yeah. Well, I'm seeing most of the board feeling like that's the direction that we should go, and we can pick that conversation back up when we get to the calendaring part of the agenda under the discussion. Which is next? All right, we will move into the discussion agenda. The first item is proposed amendment to 2023-2024 board meeting calendar. If you open up the exhibit there, you'll see that March 5th meeting is highlighted. This is actually really kind of convenient relative to the discussions that we've had about the importance of caucus nights and encouraging our communities to participate in that along with ourselves. Our board meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, March 5th, which is the caucus
That's
night.
the caucus night.
And so, when Vice President Williams and I were talking about that, we thought that maybe we would suggest moving it to our board meeting to that Monday, the 4th, which is something that we would need to do publicly through a board vote. Vice President Williams, anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I think you covered it fairly well. I just noticed early on that that was caucus night, and I also acknowledge that half of our board is up for reelection, and that might be a space where candidates, either incumbents or new candidates, might want to be at. And so
Right.
I just thought that would be a good idea to have a conversation and possibly change that date.
So do you need a motion?
We would.
So I move that we move our first meeting in March to Monday, the 4th.
Can
For
we
the
do
action
it on a
agenda.
Wednesday,
Oh,
We could,
like the 6th?
is that better? It's a Wednesday?
is that better for you?
Yeah, let me
I
look.
can.
Better for you too?
Better for you? Oh, well,
It is?
Okay.
So the
Wow.
6th?
But we still have to move it to action.
Yeah,
I
we
still have to
move
move it to action, so, okay, so I move that we move our board meeting to March 6th.
Since we have another one, should we combine them? Can we move them?
Oh, are there
Or do we
two?
have to do them separately?
I know, to action.
To action.
Yeah, I just did.
Okay, never mind,
I-
never mind.
Yeah.
Can you restate your action?
Okay, so I move that we move our board meeting to March 6th to our action agenda.
I have a motion
Second.
and a second. Any further discussion? All right, seeing none, we'll start with a roll call vote with Board Member Anderson.
Ashley Anderson, yes.
Nate Salazar, yes.
Mohammed, yes.
Brian Jensen, yes.
Christie Sweat, yes.
Williams, yes.
Jenny Sika, yes.
Excellent. We'll revisit that motion as it passed when we get to the action agenda. The next is also a calendaring meeting. Suggested change. If you open the exhibit, you'll notice that November 5th board meeting is highlighted, which is anticipated to be election night, which is a significant night for.
I don't think it's on.
It is.
It's a.
Separate.
Oh, it's on a
It's a
separate.
B.
It's the next one,
Oh, it's the next one?
next
Oh,
exhibit.
okay,
Yep.
it's over here.
Oh, there's another
Yeah.
exhibit?
Sorry for the confusion there.
No, that's okay. Oh, there, okay, got it.
Would Wednesday work better again?
I, I think so.
Go vote.
Yeah.
We need to.
Okay. Before I accept the motion, I forgot to note that there is a star next to the August 20th board meeting. Historically, we haven't had two meetings in
board meetings.
August,
I wondered
Yeah,
about
we
that.
haven't.
but we did last year, I think, in anticipation of our process in bringing us a superintendent grant.
Superintendent, yeah.
So that is also,
We need to delete that one.
we could, yes,
Okay.
if the board chooses.
The other item on this one is just to note that the address will change in midstream
Yeah.
as we move to the new office building, so that's why that's highlighted. We'll have to change the language up front there that says the first few meetings are at this address and the next few would be at the other one. So we can
Yeah,
change that language
Yeah, my thinking is that we leave that language there until we actually make that move.
until you make that.
And then bring this back up at the meeting that will be our last meeting in the temporary location.
All right, so then I move that we,
May I ask a question?
Please.
Is there a reason it says on the third line, scheduled for Tuesday of the month? Or is there a reason why it's written out in that language rather than
where are you looking?
on the
in the
third line in the
paragraph.
paragraph? It says it on both. I don't know if it's supposed to say something more
I
specific.
should say the first and third Tuesday of the month.
Okay.
Should say that.
So I don't know if you would like to
We'll catch that
move it
language.
with additional technical and conforming changes.
I'd suggest we just move it and deal with the technical changes.
Oh, my
when we get
goodness,
there.
Ashley. Okay,
You're
I move
welcome.
that we move our November 5th meeting, 2024, to November 6th, and that we delete or cancel our August 20th board meeting to our action agenda.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll start with a roll call vote with myself. Nate Salazar, yes.
Mohammed, yes.
Brian Jensen, yes.
Christy Sweat, yes.
Bryce Williams, yes.
Jenny Sika, yes.
Ashley Anderson, yes.
Excellent. That motion passes, and we will revisit that when we get to the action agenda. The third item, or I guess the second item, excuse me, is P13 Administrative Procedures, Hiring, -new. I would turn over to the superintendent and District Legal Counsel on Policy and Legal Services, Christina Kindle.
Hi, everyone. So at our Board Policy Subcommittee meeting that we held at the end of last month, this P13 Administrative Procedures, which is a draft, was proposed to the subcommittee. As you all know, you passed a new Board Policy P13 a few meetings ago, and pursuant to our standard protocol, we bring all new administrative procedures to the board to make sure that the district is creating administrative procedures that are appropriately implementing your vision for the board policy. So we brought this to the subcommittee as a draft. We recognize, Executive Director Logan Hall and I recognize that it's not quite as long as some other administrative procedures that other districts have for hiring, but that is because there is a lot of information in our various negotiated agreements with the different employee groups that outline how hiring is done for those specific groups. So we have put in the reference section the links to those agreements so that those can be cross-referenced, and we've also articulated in the administrative procedures what sort of jobs and employees fall within those various groups, so that anyone coming to the administrative procedures would understand that, you know, for example, transportation, child nutrition, building and grounds, they're all part of the common agreements, so they could look there. So we do have 4 sections in the administrative procedures related to job postings, recruitment, hiring manager responsibilities, and applicant responsibilities. I think one of the things, too, about not duplicating what is in the written agreements is those written agreements are obviously negotiated and can change every year, and we don't want to have documents that have conflicting information in them. So that's another point in streamlining this. So I'll turn it over to the committee members to sort of talk through what our discussions looked like, and then the board, again, this is just a discussion item. It gives you the opportunity to either voice some concerns that I could either tweak and work on and bring back to you as a discussion item at your next board agenda, sort of as a second reading, next board meeting, or if you're good with it, we could put it on consent. If you have significant concerns with it, we could send it back to policy subcommittee. So you do have a lot of options in what to do with this document.
Thank you, Christina.
Of course.
Committee members?
I'm not a committee
well,
member.
go ahead.
Go. No, I'm sorry. You talk.
I mean, I can only speak for myself, and please other committee members chime in as well, but I think in general, there was support to move forward with this. Obviously, that's why it's in front of all of you. I think we're open to conversation if other board members have questions, but in general, there was support.
Yeah.
Any other committee members?
When we were talking,
go ahead.
When we were talking about this, that was one of my questions to Christina, was the different negotiated agreements. And I mean, to me, that does make sense to have a link because it is an annual sort of thing. There was something that I neglected to ask at that meeting, and so I wanted to get your input on this. I know in the past there has been some confusion about hiring committees and things like that. Do we have a procedure with how hiring committees go in schools, so that there isn't, well, they did it this way at one school and they did it another way at another school. Do you understand what I'm asking?
I do, and the answer is it varies greatly depending on the type of position, the time of year that the position becomes available, as well as mostly the type of position, whether or not it's an administrative position versus like an hourly position. So those three different agreements spell out the requirements of who may be required to be on a particular committee. Ultimately, the hiring manager has to be able to select the appropriate people to be on their interview committee, and then ultimately make the selection as the hiring manager of who to recommend to human resources so we can do the appropriate background checks. But those, depending on the type of hire and type of year, for instance, like if a teacher position becomes open over the summer, we can't force teachers to come in over the summer to participate in that, but schools routinely will ask teachers who are available and would like to come and participate on those. But there are times where it may just be the principal and assistant principal on a hiring or on an interview committee, but that's not always the case. Oftentimes that is the case if it's for an hourly position like a paraprofessional or an office assistant. But in the sense of hiring a principal, there are requirements where we are supposed to have representatives from the appropriate association, from community members, so that there's a larger oversight depending on the level and classification of the job itself.
Yeah, I think in our conversation, in our subcommittee meeting, it was just very general that it represented the different associations, but it seems to me like, and maybe I'm grappling with how to address this, because I think there ends up being confusion, like when you're talking about a principal and a teacher. Is there a way in the procedures that we could say pursuant,
I guess I'm not
pursuant to the different association agreements the hiring committees perform? What I have gotten calls from different individuals when we've had a position that's been, open, and so there's been confusion. Well, we thought that the hiring committee was supposed to do this, and we thought that the hiring committee had been created, and then we were told that no, the hiring committee had changed, and so I'm thinking of one specific instance where people had committed to being on the committee, and then they were told, no, you're not on the committee, and it was, well, I'd set aside time, and to me, if there was just some way to have some clarification there.
Yeah, and I mean, I would say that under Section 3A2, which talks about all hiring managers are responsible for ensuring each notice of vacancy and hiring process complies with the written agreement of the applicable SLCSD employee group, like that hiring process would include the hiring committee. But if you would like me to do a subpart and like call that out, I mean, I think we could, but that's what's intended in that the hiring process, like the whole thing in terms of creating that hiring committee and all the other processes would comply with that. So, but it is the hiring manager's responsibilities to create that committee.
Right, and so I had looked under that thinking that would be, the area, and to me, I think it would be beneficial if you just pointed that out, that, the hiring committee falls under the purview or the instruction of the hiring manager who's ensuring that it's following the association agreements, or
I can do that.
It's something to that.
100%.
Does that make sense to the other people, or?
And my only question would be, if there aren't other questions, obviously, does this automatically go on a third reading, or do we need to act on that to give it a third reading with the changes?
It's up to the board's discretion.
Okay.
Board Sweat?
I would always be in favor of additional readings, just because I think that's a good practice, for us as policymakers to see what the policy committee brings forward, discuss what there is, any changes, allow for any edits, and then to come back. I first want to say that I really appreciate the thoughtfulness behind this policy. So thank you for that. And when I look at specifically like number 7, which is under numeral number 3A7 and talks about ensuring unsuccessful applicants are notified, that has been a criticism of our district. So I appreciate that it's been called out in this policy that we need to notify people, when they have not successfully gotten the job, and so that they know. So I appreciate that. My maybe a clarifying question. When I look at number 4, when it talks about conducting an appropriate reference check before submitting a recommendation to hire, and then right underneath that, submitting all hiring documentation, do you feel like that is clear enough when we talk about like academic degrees and their transcripts? And is that what you mean by hiring documentation? Because I know we've had some, in the past, and so I'm just wondering if that's clear enough.
That would be one part of it. The other hiring documents that we often struggle getting back are the interview notes, the screening criteria that was used to select which applicants received an interview and which ones did not, as well as confidentiality statements. The background and review of the credentials and things happen in the Human Resource Office and not at the the hiring site.
At the hiring site.
So those would be two separate pieces, but part of the conducting the appropriate reference check is there are state required questions that have to be asked, and it has to be asked of a previous supervisor of a qualifying employer.
Okay.
And so it's very important that they do that instead of like saying I can list Christina as my reference, but she's not actually my supervisor, she's my friend. So she might give me a decent reference or she might not based upon that, but we have to receive it from the previous supervisor of a qualifying employer.
Okay. I guess what I'm hearing you say, and Superintendent, I would say that if this is like cleared up some of the issues that we've had in the past, you feel like this has been, that is specific and gives good direction to not only the hiring manager, but also into HRS, so that we don't hit some of those stumbling blocks, then I'll just continue to read through and appreciate the work that's been done on it already. Thanks.
I think my question dovetails along with Board Member Sweat's, especially with the applicant responsibilities, and I could even see it with the district responsibilities as well, but just thinking about licensure, and if that is included in all new hire paperwork documentation, that's a required responsibility, and what is that?
Yeah, and it's
4.4?
also in 2C about looking at Cactus and the licensing
Right.
and making sure that they have the appropriate credentials.
Yeah, because I know like with out-of-state hires, there's a grace period that the state offers a teacher or an administrator relative to the respective license that they're required to get the Utah state license within, and maybe just being a little more explicit about that could be a benefit to this policy.
I can do that.
Looks good.
Any other comments or thoughts? I get the feeling that with some of the suggestions that we may need a third reading on this.
So that, a second?
A second.
A second reading, excuse me. Sorry. The third reading was in my brain from earlier. Sorry, it's getting late for me.
Yep.
But nonetheless, if the board's okay with that, then we will have the policy subcommittee review it again, or just
I
make the
can just make
changes.
the changes. I could send them out to the subcommittee electronically, but we wouldn't need to meet if that works.
Okay.
And then I just get your feedback electronically, and then we could put it on discussion again for the next board meeting.
Perfect. All right, thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right, moving to our action agenda. Let me get my agenda.
Can I ask a parliamentary question about the action agenda?
Please.
Is it sufficient to move to approve items 1 and 2 on the action agenda?
Yeah, you can do that.
I move that we approve items 1 and 2 on the action agenda.
Second.
I have a motion and a second, and just to be clear, the bulk of that for our record purposes would be that we move the March 5th meeting to March 6th on the Wednesday. Then we also move our November 5th meeting to November 6th to respect election night. We would be deleting the August 20th meeting on the schedule, And we would also be adapting the language to be a little more specific about which Tuesdays are in both of these draft schedules. Does that capture what we discussed in discussion? Okay. We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion to the motion? All right, seeing none, we'll have a roll call vote with Board Member Bade.
Mohammed, yes.
Ryan Jensen, yes.
Christy Sweat, yes.
Bryce Williams, yes.
Jenny Sika, yes.
Ashley Anderson, yes.
Nate Salazar, yes. That motion passes. Thank you, board members. With that, also, Bryce and I will work with superintendent and April about getting some new doodle polls out for board retreat sometime in the summer, and an additional date in March solely dedicated to board and board leadership evaluation. With that, superintendent, do you have a report for us this evening?
I do have some good news, science-oriented good news. So I hope you know Candace Penrod in our district office, who is the science supervisor. She has been made the president-elect and will become the future president of the National Science Educators Leadership Association. A national placement there, which is pretty remarkable. And I hope you've had a chance to talk about science with Candace at some point. She's an evangelist around science, and also helped create the Salt Lake City School District's Science and Engineering Fair that was held over this last weekend. She reported at the end of that 50 so a lot of the projects that are there in the science fair advanced to further competition and review and things. So 50 elementary projects, 21 middle school, 27 high school will advance to the University of Utah Science and Engineering Fair, which is great. That's a total of 96, I think, 98 projects going forward, so pretty impressive. And then 4 elementary school projects are going to be part of the Invention Convention state competition that's in April from the Science and Engineering Fair, which is kind of cool. I want to celebrate one more teacher here. Samantha Hansen, who's the 5th grade teacher in math at Nibley Park, was just named the Utah State Board of Education Math Educator of the Month. So congratulations. Yeah.
Well, thank you, superintendent. Board member reports.
Start over
Okay,
here. Start over
we'll
here
start
and go
and snake our
around.
way over,
Okay,
yeah.
that's
Board member
fine.
Sweat. And it's not about a budget.
Oh, God. Yeah. So Superintendent, I appreciate the updates that we're getting about the closings. I think that my mind's eye is about keeping our families in the district. You know, those families that, where their schools have closed, I want them to know that we care about them and that we want them to attend those schools that are still in the district. So I appreciate hearing, you know, the information that you gave us tonight, and hopefully, you know, as we go through these transitions with our families, that we're open to hear, you know, if we can improve in some way, shape, or form. So that would be really great. I'm sure Brian will probably talk about this a little bit, but we had a really interesting conversation this morning with Beacon Heights, and we were talking about just our safe route, you know, our safe walking routes. So I live just south of Parley's Way, and, you know, all of the kids that walk from Beacon Heights over, and also from Hillside, there's a great number of them that cross Parley's Way. And Parley's Way has become such a hazardous route because Foothill has become so congested that families have figured out that if they bail off on Foothill and off to Parley's Way, that gives them an access down to 23rd, which then will take them over and across over by Huckle Zoo. And I mean, they'll find different ways. And they'll even go as far down as 20th East, which is also our construction site right now. And it's super hard, you know, to see all of the, in the 30 years that we've lived in our neighborhood, that Parley's Way has become more and more of a hazard. So one of the things we talked about this morning is, first, I think it's important for our schools to know who to contact, you know, about their safe routes in the district. You know, I mean, in the past, it had been Paul Schulte. I'm assuming it's Isaac, you
It
know,
is
that's who
Isaac.
they'd be
Yes.
liaison with. But I also, it brought up a question this morning that Brian asked me and that I started thinking about, was that when you think about hazardous routes, and we have kids that are middle school kids that are walking, that do we wait for them to get hit before we have a conversation? And we've already had an accident, you know, that was on Parley's Way recently. And so I am wondering if we could have a conversation about looking at a courtesy bus that we could run. I know it's 2 miles for our middle schools, but that Parley's Way has become increasingly dangerous. And I think that to have a future conversation in some way, shape, or form of either a courtesy stop, you know, that we could identify for our hillside kids, you know, that they could be dropped off on the south side of Parley's Way, because that's getting them from the north corner to the south corner. Even with the increase of the pedestrian lights that are at the top, we have the pedestrian walking where you punch the button and the lights flash and kids can walk. But depending on the time of day, if you're going up the street in the morning, you cannot see. If you're coming down the street because of the sun. And so it obstructs that view. And although there are definitely, as Jennifer knows, because Jennifer's been over in Parley's Way, you know, that there are speed signs, they're disregarded. And, you know, we do have a fire station that's there that multiple times I've witnessed that even our fire truck, with the lights going, is hard to get out into that street because they're just flying down, you know, especially in the morning traffic. So maybe at some point in time to either have a conversation about what does a courtesy stop look like? You know, would we be able to provide, you know, some sort of courtesy stop for our kids that have to cross, and Parley's Way is not the only one. I know that there are multiple ones, you know, across our valley for our middle school students. And that 2-mile radius, you know, versus the 1.5 miles for elementary school kids, just for us to maybe have the conversation in the future, you know, because it's just getting increasingly hazardous along that road.
Thank you for that. Can I just say, we talked a little about that this morning, Isaac Astle and the team, particularly with the new boundaries and thinking about those safe walking routes.
Yes.
So this information is helpful to add to that pile of information. And
well, I appreciate that.
We'll be
so
working.
Much. I do.
Isaac's on the Transportation Advisory Board and is our link with the city.
That's fantastic.
On that with Jennifer. So with the two of them and working with the city on this will be really important. So thank you for that.
I think that just as a future, you know, and Jennifer will already know this, but for us to just ask our counterparts on the city council to always be looking at their capital improvement plan, you know, and looking for additional monies, you know, to make sure that our routes are safe for our kids. The last thing I wanted to just share with you is, Nate, I really appreciate you talking about Black History Month in your opening remarks this morning, or this afternoon. It feels like
this morning.
like we've been here all day. I know. I'm going to pass out to you a sheet of paper that, you know, this past week when I was in Washington, D.C., I had the opportunity to hear the most amazing woman speak. Her name is Juliana Richardson, and she is the president and founder of History Makers. And the History Makers, which I know that, you know, we probably know a little bit about the organization, but it actually has 3,600 oral history interviews, 1,200 hours of video, 451 cities and towns. It just goes on and on about the Black experience. And as she talked about this, what was interesting to me was just the availability of being able to go in and listen to those oral histories and to look at documentation, but to also put your own name in, you know, and see if there's any connections, you know, that you might have in cities and towns. Anyway, I just wanted to share that with you tonight. I thought that she was amazing. She really, the room was just like, you could hear a pin drop as she talked about some of the people that she's interviewed and the histories that are in this incredible bank of knowledge. Anyway, you can access their annual report if you want to know more about it. There's actually a section in the back where there's people that have been interviewed here in Utah, like Sandra Hollins is a part of, you know, has her oral history in here. Anyway, I just thought you might find that interesting, and as as a little nugget for you to log on to and get a little piece of what I got to see that day, which was completely amazing. Thanks.
Christie. Board Member Jensen?
Well, Christy talked about the Beacon Heights, and I appreciate that collaboration between Isaac and Jennifer, and then considering that as we're making all of these transitional safe route plans. My assignment is on USBA and the JLC, so I will tell you that on Thursday I will be going to a USBA directors meeting. That one will be on Capitol Hill. I think that what they're trying to do is encourage our presence there. That is one of the Day on the Hill days. That is not our day. I'm just reminding you again that our day is February 23rd. But I'll be there, and Christy will be there on the 8th as well. It was really great to hear, Jose, when you were saying that you had met with, yeah, that's wonderful. We should all be trying to find opportunities to do that. In the last JLC meeting, and I appreciate all of you that have been coming. Ashley, you make great, she gives great input, and I appreciate that. One of the things that is also available, and I think that I have sent links to everyone. I'll go back and check. Maybe I didn't get one sent to Mohammed and Jenny. I'm going to check and make sure. On Thursday nights, there's a JLC prep meeting that you can also Zoom into. And sometimes that's beneficial if you're not going to be able to be there on Friday, or if you're thinking, oh, I want to have a little bit more insight into what's going to be covered in that joint legislative committee meeting. Bryce, I think I know I sent one to, did you get a link, Nate?
I don't think that I did. I can double check though.
Okay. Please tell me if you did not get a link. I thought that I had done an across the board, but if I did, let me know. Maybe what I'll do is I'll just send out another one to everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
That'd be great.
That's the best way to do it. But in that last JLC meeting on Friday, one of the things that they did talk about, and I raised it with Yandri, was those caucus meetings on March 5th. If there was a way that we could just encourage the members of our communities to attend, because they're the ones that have skin in the game, to go to their caucuses and to see who it is that's being decided to be their delegates, and promoting education with those delegates that will be attending the different conventions. We've talked about the policy committee and the administrative procedures for hiring, and that was my other report.
Excellent. Thank you.
I did all my committee business last time, so I just have fun news to share. And February is fun because it has many notable cultural celebrations, including Black History Month, as mentioned, and Lunar New Year. And as a fourth grade constituent down the street would like me to remind everyone, Mardi Gras. I look forward to seeing how school communities celebrate, but there's a lot of other celebrations. This week is also School Counseling Week and a College and Career Week at West High, with student government also running a mural competition for the West High Clinic. And there are details on the Instagram accounts run by the Counseling Center and the Panther Pack. And I'd also like to shout out those at West selected for All-State Choir, picked as girls soccer captains, planning the West Cheer Mini Clinic, and other fundraisers. The 11 student entries selected for the high school art show at the Springville Museum of Art, and the 11 student entries advancing from District Science Fair onto the Regional USEF Fair. Keeping up with all the activities at West is a full-time job, so please reach out to me if I missed events deserving of congratulation. And in that vein, Ensign and Wasatch also sent a total of 7 entries onto USEF, and I was really proud to judge many of those projects in person at their school fair or online at the district fair. And in my last board report, I mentioned how these opportunities are not always normalized across our schools, and I'd really like to see that happen in relationship to implementing applicable portions of the strategic plan. It harkens back a little bit to my comment earlier in the meeting on parent emails regarding perceived concerns about equalized enrichment opportunities. As I mentioned then, many layers of governance allow schools to choose what types of programs they offer and why. But in the case of district and state-sponsored competitions, I'd argue there are ways the board and district staff could have a more clear role in shaping expectation and reducing barriers for entry for students across the district. And I implore us to continue to focus on those items. It's really exciting to watch students succeed in all of these endeavors.
Thank you, Board Member Anderson. Student Board Member Evans?
Yeah, I just want to congratulate all the teachers and educators tonight who got their national board certification again. I know Emily Petty, of course, she's at Rose Park. She's an amazing teacher. And Becca Hodgkinson, she taught at Escalante Elementary when I went to Escalante Elementary. I sadly never got her as my teacher, but she has always been amazing to me. So congratulations to those two, and also happy Black History Month.
Thank you. Vice President Williams?
Yeah, I have just a couple of things. I won't go too much into detail because Brian's covered a little bit of it, and Yandere did a big presentation on it tonight, but had the opportunity to attend the JLC on Friday. And then also on Friday, I had the opportunity to do a preliminary walkthrough of the West High Clinic. I'm super excited to see the space over there and really excited about all of the services that are going to be offered to our families and our students across the district. It's going to be a remarkable place. Very excited about it. And then between now and our next board meeting, I think I have all, if not all, of my 9 SCC meetings. So that will be fun.
Board Member Bade?
First of all, I just want to wish a happy Black month for every Black person within our precinct and within our district, and especially those who are like out here in our district in making sure that equity is continued to be forefront of every decision we make. And I encourage you to, when you have a chance, to just go and read about Eugene Jacques Ballard. He is the first African American, the first Black military pilot. And, you know, as you all know, I'm a veteran, so I have a soft spot for veterans. And just listening to his story about what it was like being the only Black person out there as an officer, and he can't talk endless talking to him, and just the challenges that they went through and so, but nevertheless they persevered until he became the first ever, U.S. pilot, and that was just like fantastic to read about those. So those are just like few of inspirational stories. And I want today to send this message to our kids who are Black in our precinct, in our district. I want them to know that they can be that pilot as well. They can be that president. They can be whatever they want to. I hope that they will always be able to stand strong, and no matter what the challenges are in front of them, that they can actually, get up, dust up, and push forward, because life does not hand it to us easy. It's just the reality of life. And also I had the honor of going to open house at Whittier, and every single parent that came and visited the place, they were extremely excited. they were extremely excited, and you see the principal out there, she's out there welcoming them and just like meeting them in person, and talking to them, giving them a tour, and, seeing the superintendent out there and funny parts of some people that did not know who the mayor was there, and they were just introducing her to the school, knowing that she is mayor, she knows about the school. And just like so many amazing things, it's such a positive, energetic space for sure. And lastly, to our families who are, really frustrated, or I would say exasperated with the process and the decision that's been made, I beg of you that you give us a chance to move forward. The district have worked very hard. I empathize with you. My kid is going to move school. I wish that was not the case. But nevertheless, the change is imminent and essential. Look at Salt Lake City, how big it is and what it used to be, a little valley. And suddenly, changes are starting to take place, and look where we are right now. Change is essential. But I know if you can just trust us, and if you have suggestions, bring them to us so we can make the next process even better. And that is the only way for us that we can come together and make sure that those kiddos have every tool that they need so that they can also eventually, we'll be closing some schools, who knows, So, and I just want to I want to thank also my fellow board members and the superintendent and the business administrator. I know it's been a rough patch, but I love and see how we are like supporting each other. And that to me, means a lot. It's the only thing that keeps me up, in the morning. Well, wakes me up in the morning and be ready to look at those emails. And I do not respond to many. Sorry about that. But that's, we have a great district, and I look forward to, a very successful transition for the new school year. Thank you.
Board Member Page. Board Member Sika?
I don't have anything.
Excellent. Thank you. And I don't have anything as well. So that concludes our meeting, and I will call us adjourned.
Thank you.
Lord have mercy. All right.
Yep.
I drove.
Oh.
Yes.
She's my representative, so I've got to work with her, and she's been our representative.
I actually have
Do you know her